So just a few housekeeping notes. The agenda pack has been circulated to members and available via ModGov and also via the council website from the link that was sent out with the invitation to members. Can I just remind people when they are invited to speak, can you clearly state who you are for the benefit of anyone who is later listening to the meeting, so that they can identify who is speaking and ensure if you're in the room that you do turn the microphones on so that people can hear us online. Equally, could I just ask members in the room if you can make sure that you've got your mobile phones turned to silent or off, most appreciated. And those joining us online, if you can make sure you keep your cameras and microphones turned off until you're called to speak, please. As agendas are now viewed electronically, can I request that members and officers refer to the page numbers from the agenda pack to assist those present in finding the appropriate information that's being discussed. I've not been advised that there's any planned fire drill, so if the alarms go off, then they are real. Please follow the Democratic Services members out of the room and they'll show you where to congregate safely. One further item for members of the committee, you're aware obviously through property rationalisation, we're looking at the availability of this room for our meeting dates, and will be notified shortly of the fact that there will be some changes to the dates of the committee to have this room available. But just to put in your diaries for the next meeting, it will be on the date that is shown. Then you will be changing to the Shepton Mallet offices rather than the JMR room. Same. Someone's right. Sorry, we had a sudden echo in the room then. So just to remind you, it will be the time that it is shown in your papers, but it will be at a different venue. You will be getting an electronic notification soon, just to make sure you're aware of that. Move on to item 1 of our agenda, which is apologies for absence. Have any, please?
Yes, we have apologies from Councillor Rodriguez and Sue Osborne-Stubb, who will be fractionally late.
I've also had apologies from Councillor Buck-Phillip, who is unable to be with us today. That was Councillor Nick Cottle has unfortunately been taken ill this morning, so Simon Cole will be subbing, but not with us yet. Yeah, Councillor Ham, your mic's on. And that's it. Thank you. Okay, I think we also have some officer apologies. That's fine. Okay, so item 2 is declarations of interest. Are there any declarations that members have other than those that are already in terms of memberships of other councils? Okay. Item 3 is the minutes of the last meetings. We have the minutes of the 29th of May and the 19th of June. Are there any amendments to the 29th of May that anyone up? Or could I have a proposal that I sign them as a true and accurate record? Thank you. Seconded, thank you. Those in favour that I do so, please show. Clearly carried. And for the minutes of the 19th of June, and are there any amendments? In which case, if I could have a proposal that I sign them as a true and accurate record. Again, thank you, Councillor Hobbass. Councillor Lovell. Those in favour that I do so, please show. Again, clearly carried. Thank you very much. That moves us to the public question time session, and I don't believe we've had any questions registered. Okay. Which takes us on to our forward plan and agenda item 5. Our members have seen the current forward plan that has been circulated. Are there any comments or suggestions on that? We've got a fairly busy diary coming forward. Seeing anything on that? Okay, so if we move then on to our first main item of the agenda, which is agenda item 6, the budget monitoring. And Take no cancellation. If you'd like to introduce them, we'll come to Mr. Rachel.
Thank you very much, Chair and Committee. On these papers, you will note, of course, that this month this went to the Executive first on the 15th of July. So my apologies for that. I think there are many good reasons why the production of these papers has been right up against it, and not least closing down the previous year and also establishing the regular monitoring directorate. So when you look at these papers, you may want to consider the fact that first appendices are for the current year, 24-25, whereas Appendix 10 is actually the previous year, the outturn. So it might be easier to consider the outturn first before the monthly monitoring for the current year. So also on the recommendations of this paper, it was noted at Executive, and it's worth noting again here, that recommendation B was that Executive should note the final outturn for revenue, capital and the HRA would be reported to Executive at its August meeting. That is now amended. The HRA paper will indeed come to August Executive, but the revenue and the capital papers, the outturn, will come to September Executive. Of course, this is an improved position for the outturn for 23-24. Members will recall that at month 3, we were forecasting an overspend of over 28 million, and then it came down to over 16 million. And you will see now that we're looking at a small underspend of 1.6 million, which is a remarkable change. Members will note, though, that the savings have been made not in adults and children's that have continued to have an overspend, although there are mitigations that have reduced those overspends, but that the underspends have been particularly in the other directorates, and that is something that has been a concern for years, even before vesting day, and remains a concern now. And when we look at the budget monitoring for the current financial year, we can see that adults is looking healthier because, and that will be because you'll recall that there was a great deal more put into the revenue budget for adults when we set the budget in February. We still have considerable concerns for children's, with a greater number of children coming into care, with still some expensive placements. So, sorry. So sorry if anyone missed any of that. I have Christian Evans with me, who will take any detailed questions. We're always open to questions. And again, Chair, apologies for the fact that this month it came to Executive before scrutiny. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Just before I come to Mr. Evans, one thing I should have mentioned earlier, of course, is as members know, these meetings are recorded and are available later. We do also have a member of the press with us today who is carrying out some recording during the meeting. So just so that you're all aware, it makes no difference anyway, because we're recorded anyway, but just so you should be aware. Mr. Evans.
Nothing really to add from what Councillor Lysham said at the moment. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much. Members, any questions that you have on the papers that have been circulated to you? Councillor Coles.
My apologies, Chair, for my tardy arrival. I was late last minute up, so I won't comment on this report.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Hobhouse and then Councillor Sieb. Councillor Hobhouse.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I see that in the closing up of last year, we saved £10 million on budget interest that we expected to pay but didn't have to. On the next 12 months, as the interest rates come down, what are you expecting to save on that interest?
Chair, if I could just make the point that slippage on a capital programme always then requires less borrowing. So I hope that your optimism about reducing interest rates is well founded. If you know something that we don't do let us know, please. But the main reason that there has been that saving through Treasury management is slippage on the capital programme, and that affects not just borrowing, cost of borrowing, but also the minimum revenue provision that sits alongside the borrowing, which is what pays off the borrowing when the loan matures. So there are good things about making savings on Treasury management, but it also means that capital programme is delayed in its delivery. So it's good news in the short term. In the medium term, it's not all good news, if that makes sense.
Thank you. Councillor Seeb.
Thank you, Chairman. I think in general, one of the messages which comes through to me is the importance of tracking liabilities and time in particular, because a couple of the exceptional items that make the end of year figures look so good are things which have.
Sorry, can I bring that closer? Try again.
Is that better? Yes, the importance of tracking both liabilities, things such as the NHS payment that was on our books and went away. That is something which we should really have been discounting because it was sort of known, and we should have been ignoring that really because it was never our money, and yet we were focusing on a headline rather than on the net position, discounting that. So I think that presentationally, the importance of tracking our accounting liabilities to where we hold money on behalf of others and so on is important, and that didn't really come through for me in the paper that had been being done. And to be honest, although I've been to the last 3 of these meetings, I hadn't really tracked when that was going to happen. So again, getting the budgeting across time is really important, and getting liabilities clarified is really important. The other thing which I think I'm not terribly happy is being well reported. Although it's factually accurate, it's reported in a complicated way. For example, in Appendix 2 on page 47, we had the story of the reduction in unregistered placements being swapped to residential care placements for children. Ultimately, the cost per child is what's actually important, and the number of children being looked after is important, and the price of placements is important, and the category of that is rather less important in terms of financial monitoring. Whilst they get spent through different destinations of spend, actually it's one budget as far as we're concerned for looking after children, and we should really be looking at the whole. So to have such a complicated presentation, I think obfuscates the net cost per child improvement that has taken place, and the increase in placements required, which has taken place. And I think just generally, we need to look at the whole problem. And I do wonder a little bit whether, stovepiping of responsibilities may be part of the story with constant overspends in certain areas, because managers are not seeing the whole helicopter view in the numbers in front of them, just the instantaneous decision they have to make. I'm concerned that we need to have the helicopter view when steering the ship. If I could mix several analogies. Thank you.
If I could just come back to holding monies for other bodies. So some of that happens on a regular basis. You'll know what was the Local Enterprise Partnership, Somerset Rivers Authority. The NHS, I think is fair to say that that was more of a one-off case. Where we have the underspend on Treasury management, that will be a mix of having achieved more and saved, because we always see a figure for an underspend or an overspend, but what we don't see are all those individual figures where some are over and some are under. So clearly holding that money did contribute to that underspend on Treasury management. My personal view is that I think the government could do more to help local authorities with where they deposit their money safely, because our Treasury management team have to find safe homes for very large amounts of money. And I think that's something that the government could be offering us better. If they can offer us PWLB loans, on which I believe the government do make some money, not a huge amount as in percentage, but they do make money out of those loans to local authorities. I think they could do a better job of helping local authorities deposit their money safely and get a fair return. And if I could sit in front of this new government with a few asks, that would be one of them. So I think that is a one-off situation, but it's a fair point that it was not clear enough for members. On the children's and where we're looking at overspends on children's, we of course, part of our transformational activity is the Homes and Horizons project, which when we took over as administration, we could see immediately had started. And my colleague, Heather Shearer, thank you. I knew Heather was coming in when she was free. It's a really important part of the work we do. Perhaps, Chair, I could hand over to my colleague, Councillor Shearer, at this point, if that's okay. Thank you.
Councillor Shearer.
Thank you so much, Chair, and thank you and apologies for being late coming in this morning. I wanted to pick up on that, and I wanted to pick up, I put my hand up actually also to come back to Peter or Councillor Sieb's points, because you make some very good points in terms of the way we present information. Certainly something I want to be doing is making it as clear as possible in these reports, and I realise sometimes less is more when it comes to clarity. But I did want to make a bit of a point about, as an assurance really, and I've been assuring myself of this, about the helicopter view and that kind of very strategic view. One of the reasons, there's lots of reasons why we delineate and make clear which types of accommodation children are in. The unregistered placements are always a concern for a couple of reasons. One is that they are unregistered, which means their quality control and their legality is in question, and they're very much in extremis. So we always want to have them as low as possible in terms of number, but sometimes we're stuck because of the way the market works. But the point I want to make about the delineating between, say, the residential placements and the unregistered placements, and why it's important is because there's been a narrative for a long time that the unregistered placements were massively expensive and the residential placements were just expensive. And over time, it's good to track that, because actually the unregistered placements have come down by about 25% on average per child, and the residential have gone up by 15%. But the numbers of those going into residential placements have also gone up. So we were budgeting on 77, we've got 110, and in terms of numbers. And so that will, even though it's a lower increase, there's a higher number. So it's really important to we're titrating all the time, both for the quality of the care for the child, which is the most important thing, and balancing that against budget, and also against the Homes and Horizons element of our transformation, if you like, in our strategic way of approaching this. Means we can both control the cost and the quality and the outcomes for the children who are the most disadvantaged with the greatest needs. But that's a small number. So, and again, offset again and again, there's so many different levers in children's that, of course, we've also had an increase in the number of children looked after this year, quite materially for us. And again, which we're diving into to find out what that's happened. But if, Court of Protection says, or we need to have children in care, they're in care, and we can't budget that across. So I absolutely get the simplicity, and I'm on your side all the time to try and make it as clear as possible. I hope that's helpful, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Sieb.
Yes, I just wanted to come back. I think we're all in exactly the same spot. We did the strategic change was willful and for a particular set of reasons. There's no reason for a set of accounting reports to do anything other than say we're saving a lot of money and we're getting a lot more efficient and we're being nicer to children and we're doing all of that. And yet the tables and the numbers are being reported by stovepipe. Whereas I would have, what I'm suggesting generally is that you need the helicopter view, you need to actually write a strategic paper that says, you will notice this has gone down, that's gone up, and here's the balance. I mean, for example, a stacked bar chart showing the per child cost would allow you to put both on the same thing and show the top of the bar coming down as the strategy bit and delivered, and a per child basis allows you to separately present the, you know, we've had more children through. I was able to work it out, but actually the purpose of an outturn report is to say how efficiently you've used the money. And I didn't think that came through strongly, so that was why I was making my point. And I think there's another lovely example later on, which is in the use of bed and breakfast, which you know, is something which is truly horrid. We need to actually fix that. This report should be saying that, not just the bold, here are the numbers, really. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Aishaw.
Just to come back, Chair, to say we're doing a great deal of work at the moment on the corporate performance reporting, and some of the things that Councillor Sieve has said now are being said in those meetings as we're working on corporate performance, and they're well said. Thank you.
Thank you. I've got a couple of councillors in the room, and then I've also got a couple of councillors online. So Councillor Locke is next, and then Councillor Trimnell. Councillor Locke.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Chair. I just want to speak on something, and I will refer to the page number, and it's something which is sort of dear to my heart and the area which I represent. And it's on page 66, and it's with reference to the £500,000 underspend in respect of theatres, which is due to additional income from ticket sales at Westlands Entertainment. While that is self-explanatory, I would like a little bit of information as and I say why that is sort of well, it is self-explanatory, but why it's dear to my heart is because with devolution in progress as it is at the moment, and local parishes and town councils looking to take over facilities, any finance to do with these properties, and seeing as how I was one of the instigators when the Westlands Leisure Complex was taken over by the district councils and the parishes at the time, is why I'm asking the question now. And that is where it says that with the ticket sales at the Westlands Entertainment Centre, in addition, there are underspends on premise budgets. Now, on the next paragraph, it goes on to say whether it's linked to the paragraph above there, 1 million due to a combination of underspends on various sports centres. Well, sports centres, I appreciate, are leisure and activity centres, but we're talking about theatres on the other aspect. I would like to know what that breakdown is, because if the underspends on other premises are to do, let's say, for maintenance in the upkeep of those premises, it's all right to say you have an underspends now, but you could be having overspends moving forward if you don't keep it going. So that's where I'd like a breakdown, and my interest is purely from the devolution point of view of parish councils taking over the running of premises from this authority because of the financial situation. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Aishaw.
I'll try here, Chair. It may be that we need to meet with Councillor Locke for a more detailed answer, and I completely understand why he wants that. To go to the leisure budgets first, all the leisure budgets are to do with contracts and in one place lease. So in 3 of the former districts, there were contracts for leisure facilities and in the former Mendip, there was actually a lease to Fusion. So where those are underspent, I think that those are completely separate from the paragraph above. So the underspend in respect of theatres, a lot of that, as we've just been saying, you see an underspend, you don't see what leads to it. So that underspend is driven in some considerable proportion by additional ticket sales at Westlands, which of course is not surprising while the Octagon is closed. And the overhead costs for the Octagon are greatly reduced while it is closed, as opposed to how it would be when it was open. And that would be the same for any subsidised theatre anywhere in the country. And it is a great sadness that it costs less to run it while it's closed than while it's open. The only theatres that I know of that are different are the West End, the #1 theatres, which around here like Bristol Hippodrome, that are run by the really big commercial operators, and some of the amateur theatres I know, amateur run, that actually manage without any subsidy. Any theatre that has subsidy, whether it's from the Arts Council or local authority or any other form of subsidy, they would all be less expensive while they're closed than when they're open, but they're not delivering the services for which they were built and intended. So I think those paragraphs actually sit separately. I think it might be better if there'd been a subheading between them. Thank you.
Thank you. And as you say, you'll have further discussions with Councillor Locke in terms of the detail.
Thank you for that, Chair. I look forward to that. Yeah, and I think that is essential. Thank you.
Councillor Trimnell.
Thank you, Chair. So I have an interesting glitch on my iPad where I write new things, old stuff goes. So all my notes are going, disappearing. Everything I wrote last night is gone. But I'm going to go by memory. So children and adults are based on human need. They're essential. We have to react to the situation that we find. So I understand that they're very hard to predict, basically. But obviously, we've got a lot of favourable items that are coming through now, so departments and areas that have actually managed to make savings, which I think you may have said before were due to the spending control boards that you had, and that's made a really big difference. And I wondered whether they would be kept on as a permanent feature forever to obviously keep our finances in line and make sure that we're always spending our taxpayers' money effectively. But what I wanted to ask was basically, when you budget next for all the different department spending, will that be based on the savings that they've made, or will it be based on the budget that they would have had? And will there be capacity for them in coming years to continue to make those savings, or are they at a maximum level of saving already?
That's a really complicated question, Chair, but it's a very good one. It is a very good one. Predicting spend on adults and children's, although it's easy to put them together, actually I'm told that adults is a little bit easier to predict than children's because there are various rates of ageing, rates of mortality, apologies for saying that, but that makes it a bit more predictable in adults. In children's, I understand, and my colleague Heather will be able to give you a bit more detail if you want it, that sometimes young people come forward who cannot be safe at home, who we did not previously know about. On the savings control boards, on the recommendation to the executive, recommendation E was that we would receive a report in August setting out proposals to change how those control boards and panels operate in light of the experience and learning over the last year. So I'm looking forward to seeing that too. And then on the next budgeting round, I think this is the really key point, is which of these savings are recurring, which can be recurring, and which are one-off. So in the underspend that we look at now, it's really easy to see where there are one-offs, like the gain share from connecting Devon and Somerset, where that is a really big saving well, it's money in actually, rather than a saving, but it contributes to the saving. So for me, one of the most important things now is, as we work through the control boards, is to establish exactly what are recurring savings and what are not, because that will be the key to creating a viable council, along with the items that we'll be looking at later this morning about how we fund the enormous transformation that we are going through so soon after LGR.
Okay, so just, it's not my area of expertise. So when you set the next budget, if you set 10 million for a budget for a department last year and they only spent 9 million, will you set the next budget based on 10 million that they were given, whether you foresee that they needed more or less, or the 9 million that they actually spent? How does that work?
Ideally, Chair, I'd say you do zero budgeting for every directorate. So you actually go back to what you need and what your prediction of its cost would be. I know I've run a budget in the public sector, and the easy way is you look at it, you say, can we do the same, add inflation, bang, there you go. That's where we've gone wrong before, I believe. And when we had the zero budgeting for adults, which is what led to a much greater amount of money in the adults budget for the current year, I was told that that hadn't been done fully for at least 10 years. So the thing that I would like us to do is a similar exercise for children's. As it's looking at the minute, as we get towards Q1, there will be real concern about how predictable that is. And I think I have to go back to the long tail of COVID and how much young people's lives were affected by the lockdown, by the closure of schools, by family circumstances, which were then immediately followed by the cost of living crisis. So I don't know whether my colleague Heather has anything more to add.
Councillor Shearer, did you want to add anything?
As ever, Liz is doing a really good job of my job for me, which is smashing. Yes, I think that the transformation work and the transformation finance board that we're working on is trying to do that, to get that smarter all the time about our prediction. And again, that, you know, very gaily, I was the lead member for adults for the first year in this council. And I thought that was a big, fat, complicated budget, and it is. Children's is maybe not bigger, but it's certainly fatter and more complicated. That the different levers are really quite complex. So yeah, we're having to look across everything about how we contract or procure provision for things, how we resource them in terms of people, and if our transformation works the way we want it to, what will be happening is our spend will be occurring in different places. So the more that we can get ahead of something around getting the early intervention and early help model right, we'll have more people there, children there, in the hope that we have fewer children coming through into children looked after. However, there will still, it's getting across what you don't know. So it will be difficult. It'll take some time but I'd love to see over time we shift it into more predictive, preventative work, so we have less at the statutory sort of bit at the end. But that could take some time. But I think Liz has put it as well as we can. But we're still trying to keep this. We're trying to sharpen all of our pencils in the box. So it is about how we do contracting, how we do procurement, how we do quality assurance, all of those things, to try and keep it the best care we can for the lowest price.
Thank you. Councillor Ham.
Thank you, Chair. I just got quite a simple question. It seems good that the accounts are looking a little bit better. But the new government has said that public pay increase is going to be around 5.9%. What did we budget for? And are we expecting back pay on that pay? And if so, what is the extra cost and how much?
I believe our budget for the current year includes 4% pay award. If I remember the figures correctly, and there's no guarantee on this, I think 1% additional is another something like 2.5 million. But of course, as we go through transformation and the size of the council reduces, that figure would reduce too. But I'm I don't know where government are going any more than you do. If Councillor Hobhouse can fill us in on interest rates, perhaps he can. He can do a bit of work on pay award too. And I worked in the public sector when we went through multiple years of zero pay award. And I know how that eats away at people's disposable income every year, and every year it becomes, and I know as well that all the officers of this council, all of them, are working harder than they ever have. And many people, huge numbers of people, went through LGR and the work that that entailed, and then started to breathe again, and then have to work now on the transformation, and a much bigger programme of transformation than LGR was ever envisaged to be. So 4% is the short answer.
Councillor Ham.
Can I just come back? I was not getting it, the pay, this, whether the staff would deserve the pay or not. It was just pointing out that it was going to be an extra cost to the council and budgeted.
Thank you. Before I come to the members online, I mean, most of the questions I had down here have been addressed by others around the room. There was just one thing I wanted to ask was, in terms of page 30, there is discussion there of the debt that we've had from our predecessor councils and how that's changed. I wasn't quite clear, and it's probably just my not fully understanding it, but there was what was described as intra-unitary, which I'm guessing was the loans between the councils. I wasn't quite sure how that fitted into whether our borrowing has increased or decreased, because some of it was borrowing between us. So if someone could give me a simple explanation on that, I'd be really appreciative.
We really need Anton Sweet here or Alan Sanford, but intra-authority borrowing is still borrowing on vesting day. And so what was between councils becomes in effect on the first day internal borrowing, and then is externalised if need be. So I think it's a kind of two-step process. It becomes part of Somerset Council's internal borrowing, and then it becomes externalised as need be. Actually, the borrowing over the 23-24 year actually reduced by 10 million, which probably surprised a number of us, including me. But they're big figures. You know, it's when I was speaking at a parish council recently, somebody said to me, "Are you talking in millions?" And I realised I'd immediately fallen into that trap of talking about 8 instead of 8 million. And I think it's really easy to do that when you're working in a council of this size. And I think from the human being point of view, we should not do it. We should talk about how many millions.
Thank you. I've got a couple of members who've indicated online and have been patiently waiting. So first Councillor Woods and then Councillor Chilcott. Councillor Woods.
Thank you, Chairman. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Oh, that's great. First of all, I'm a bit out of sync with what's going on, but my question. Thank Heather Shearer for her report, but my question was earlier in the meeting. Councillor Lation talked about approaching government for money. I think that was the message I got. If she's thinking about approaching government for money, can you think about my division, which is being cut off, not only by road, but with the fact that the marina is completely silted up, and there's plans to sell off the marina lease for 200 years to an unacceptable party. That's all the way I can put it. But if they're talking about selling off the lease for 200 years, please, can they think about applying for government money so we can clear up the coastal parts of your patch?
Councillor Woods, I think that may be an item for you to have a more detailed discussion with Councillor Lation, but I don't know that that's really part of this discussion on the budget. I understand the issue you're raising, and it's obviously important in your area, but I think that is something that you need to be taking up with the relevant executive members directly, rather than through the meeting.
Yeah, well, I'd like them to think about ports. Thank
Understood.
you.
It's just that where I was talking about going to government, that was about where we deposit monies rather than asking government for monies. We've got lots of asks of government, but I think we've got to stand in turn here. Thank you.
Understood. Thank you, Councillor Woods. Councillor Chilcott.
Thank you, Chair, and good morning. Just a couple of points before I ask my questions. First one really was around the rebasing of the budget, and I did go away and have a conversation offline, as I said I would, at a previous meeting, and we did do a rebase of the budget. Peter Lewis and I did that piece of work. I needed to check my memory when we had to reset that budget. That was part of the work, so I think to say it's never been done is slightly not right. Might have been done in a slightly deeper level given the financial challenges, but it was certainly done with Peter Lewis and myself and adults, so I'll just mention that first. My first question really is around the borrowing, and again this quashed amount between the councils. Again, I've asked online and there is new borrowing there, that because the borrowing's gone down, we had a large figure that was quashed. So overall, the borrowing has increased. And I think that also has to be borne in mind that our cash held has decreased dramatically as well. So quite rightly, this council has used its cash first before going to borrowing. So I think the two need to be looked at together. So a few questions then, a few concerns as you would expect. So whilst the budget is balanced, which is helpful, certainly in terms of our vulnerable reserves, we still have a major overspend in adults and in children. So those challenges are still there. But I have several concerns following on. And the first one really is around the capital programme. I know it's not mentioned here today, but there is a figure of an underspend of 10 million there. And that is actually not a decrease in borrowing. And I'm watching my words here. It's the fact that we put in a need for borrowing that wasn't fulfilled. In other words, our capital programme did not spend all the money that it was committed to spend. And I think my first question is, do you think the capital spend programme was accurate? I know we haven't got it in front of us, but it's there by implication, because had that capital spend been more accurate, then effectively £10 million could have been spent on vulnerable children and adults. So that's my first question. I know there'll be more to play, but overall, you know, is there a feeling that that capital programme perhaps could have given up some of those spends earlier in the year to help with other pressure areas in the council? So that's my first question. And I know, Liz, we've had long conversations about capital programme, but is that still a concern? That's my first question.
Councillor Lashton, do you want to take that one first?
Yeah, I think I need to try and explain that the capital programme is made up of so many things, some of which are funded by the council and borrowing, but many of them are regeneration and projects that were funded under levelling up. So I know from sitting on the Town Deal Board in Glastonbury that there's huge slippage in that programme through nobody's fault. It was that as they started, as the town investment plan was approved by government and the work was done by the professionals to go out to tender on those projects, we had to de-scope and de-scope on the projects before we were anywhere near to go to tender. And then the tenders came in too high and we had to go back and start again. So on any of the projects in the town deal, there was anything between 6, 9, even more months of slippage. So I think the capital programme, I think there might be a different answer according to each part of the programme. So there is the work that's done on school, the maintained school estate. There's work done on highways. There's been slippage there. Anyone who's been following the Dunball roundabout and Cross Rifles roundabout, those kind of things, I remember working on them, trying to understand what the capital programme was before vesting day. So on that 10 months between the election and vesting day, I tried to understand what the capital programme entailed, and it was coming from different teams across 5 different councils. So when we got to set the budget for this year with the capital programme for this year, which is reduced from what it might have been a few years ago, because of the cost of borrowing and because of the cost of construction, it was easier this year to get it into one capital programme than it was the year before. But I'm seeing things that I was talking about in the summer of 22 that are still not underway. So I think there are lots of different answers within the capital programme.
Thank you, Chair. The reason I ask is that is a massive underspend. And I think it'd be really helpful to get under the skin of that when the capital programme comes forward, because that, and I'm talking about the town deals, they are funded, they are not capital slippage or borrowing affected, but something has affected that budget by £10 million, and we probably haven't got all the information before us today, so I welcome that. My second area of concern is around the savings, and the reason that's a real level of concern, it's a measure of the effectiveness of the budget and whether savings are met or not. Now, the savings delivered figure is very low. There's a lot of savings that have not been delivered. So my question is, was that an acceptable level? Were savings to replace those that were not met put in place? And moving forward, how reassured are you that the massive savings programme we are now embarking upon will be met, given what we've seen before us today in the report?
Thank you. Councillor Isham.
And I do know that Christian Evans, sat next to me, has been working on some really helpful spreadsheets on delivery of savings. And I've seen the first iteration of those. And I asked the question, will those come to scrutiny and executive, because they are extremely helpful and they are under directorates and line by line. And I think that's exactly what we need. So the work through performance, risk and budget board, that's 3 separate pieces of work. And if we're successful through that board, those 3 pieces of work will join up much better than they are now, because that is one area where we really, really need this council to improve. So on the delivery of savings, Councillor Chilcott is absolutely right. If anybody can put forward savings, the real answer is, can you deliver them, and what your progress is as you go through the year? Because if you put forward a saving for the whole financial year, but you don't start to deliver until June, September, you don't gain a whole year saving either. So I know this is something that I've heard Councillor Sieb talk about a great deal, is about being really clear about whether it's a whole year saving or a part year saving. I hope that helps a bit. That these are really complex questions, and they could take a whole meeting for the officers to answer in full, in my view.
Thank you. But as a headline figure, we've got 30% unachieved. If we are anywhere near that level into current year, then it will be disastrous for the council, really. So it's just that really good practice, 1, getting it right, 2, scheduling it across when you think the savings are made, and 3, in the event that it cannot be made, what else comes forward? And I haven't seen that this year, so my concern is going into next year. That's going to be even more crucial for the budget. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Sieb.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to call out something I think I heard sneak in through the back door in the previous question. Of course, if you have an underspend on a capital programme, it's usually not an underspend, it's usually a delay. And so the money still needs to be committed to that capital decision, spending decision. It's when it actually leaves our exchequer that is the question. And as such, it wouldn't be available for other use. But I think what was actually inferred was that we could use some of the capital underspend on a revenue spend. And I just wanted to point out that, I thought that's what the inference was of the question, and I don't think that's correct.
Am I allowed to respond to that, Chair?
I will let you just respond briefly, Councillor Chilcott.
As you felt it was inference, my inference was such that our capital programme has put forward a need that is funded in the revenue budget that has resulted in the main in a £10 million underspend. So something around that, and we can talk about that next meeting, something around that needs to be looked at, because that funding effectively, if it wasn't needed when the budget was set, that money could have been used elsewhere. Thank you. Hopefully that's clarity.
Thanks very much. Councillor Lyshaw.
I just want to make the point that I think that would have been very difficult to predict at the beginning of the year. And from my point of view, I do take the point about the capital programme including fully funded projects, and that they are funded, so therefore they don't impact on Treasury management, although they do all carry risk. Let us not forget that they all carry risk. I do still think of them as part of the capital programme. They're different lines, I get that. Thank you.
Thank you. I think, members, I'm not seeing anyone else commenting. I think we had a good discussion in terms of the issues that have been raised. I mean, I think we're all aware that there are a huge number of moving parts in this process at the moment, and I wanted to thank the officers and members who helped bring this together. Also, as has been highlighted, the number of savings that have already been brought forward by a number of departments have been pretty colossal, and there's been an awful lot of work going into to delivering those. So again, thanks to that. But we are very much part of an ongoing situation, which is still a lot of work done, but a lot of work still to do. I think going forward, certainly has come from the discussions that we've had, we need to be making sure that we're getting up to date and sort of real cost and income data that's coming through for the executive and for scrutiny to be able to make decent decisions on, because we need to get those forecasts right as best as we can. We have addressed, I hope, the situation in terms of timings of meetings now that these reports will be coming to us before they go to the exec, so we can feed into that process. So again, that's going to be a job for members to get involved with. I think, again, it was highlighted the learning that's going on from the control boards and taking those forward into the future. I think it would be very useful, certainly, if we can be seeing coming to this scrutiny committee the discussion about the budget setting process and how we can maybe feed in to help with that in the future. The capital budget, again, was raised as something that may well be something that we should be looking at individually as an item coming to us here, and how that is put together and delivered, and also the issue about the savings delivery and the making sure that when we have savings that we know that they can be delivered and how they're going to be delivered. So I think that again may be another item that we need to look at that process as to how that comes through. But again, as I say, thank you to Councillor Lyshaw and her team of officers. Thank you to Councillor Shearer as well for your comments today. But it's, as I say, it's a work in progress and there's an awful long way to go still, but thank you for where we are now, and we'll look forward to the next instalment in a month's time. Thank you. Members, that if you're happy that we record the comments that we've been making today, and obviously, again, thanks to the executive members for being present, that they can take those straight back from the committee. Item 7 on our agenda is the Improvement and Transformation Programme update. And I've got down at the moment that is it Sarah Scrutiny who's introducing this, and sorry, I didn't see you at the end of the tape. If you'd like to introduce the report, please. Thank you.
Of course. Thank you, Chair. Conscious of making sure the microphone is near enough. I got the nod from over there. Yeah, so what you have in front of you today is one of the regular update reports on progress on the Improvement and Transformation Programme. The format of this report is you've got the covering report, but you've also got a copy of the monthly reporting dashboard, which is a new dashboard that we've created, which outlines the status of the individual work streams within the Improvement and Transformation programme, as well as the activities and any of the risks to programme delivery. And due to the reporting kind of timelines, just to note that that progress report and that monthly update dashboard is dated the 12th of July. Things move pretty quickly, so I will be able to update you as we go through when you have questions, if anything has changed since then. One of the important milestones that we have achieved is, and I would like to again extend thanks to Scrutiny Committee for your comments and contribution to the productivity plan, which we submitted last Friday to government, which set out our approach to improvement and transformation, as well as you'll recall the barriers that we're requesting for government to support us in terms of overcoming in terms of raising our productivity. So that was submitted last week, is now published on our website. So just looking at, so if we go to page, just scrolling through to the into the detail there, to page 127. So that's where you'll see the programme reporting dashboard begins with that overview there in terms of the programme. Just to flag that the overall programme is currently rated at green. We have you members will be aware that we have moved the date of launching the 45-day consultation on layers 4 and 5, which was due to be into July, to September, where we are taking the whole of layers 4, 5 and 6. So that's the rest of the whole organisation. We're going out to consultation, recognising that actually in terms of being able to see, making sure that every single person within the council can see themselves in that new structure.
I'm trying to get you on camera.
Oh, sorry.
No, it's not you. I'm just going to see if we.
Do you want me to go down to the front? Is that easier? Oh,
It's got
there I am. Nice not being on camera. But no, that's absolutely fine. So you know, we can talk a little bit more about that. So the other thing to note on there is partnerships, devolution and localities work stream. So the reason that that is rated amber at this report was due to some resourcing issues which are now resolved. So we should be seeing that turning green over the next weeks. So, so what I'd like to do now is just open up to questions rather than going through the report in detail.
Thank you very much. Councillor Trimnell.
Thank you very much. It's only a very quick question. It was just something that really struck me actually on page 127, where you had the programme progress summary and overview. And there was an employee engagement survey, and that was live, as it were, for 3 weeks. And yet I was really struck by the low engagement rate or response rate from staff. And I wondered whether there was any reason for that that you were aware of, because it's such an important thing that I wondered whether there was something significant in the what I feel was a low response rate. It might be much higher than you thought, but I would always respond to something like that. And I just wondered if there was something in it.
Thank you, through you, Chair. From my experience of running surveys, that's actually a good response rate. I'll just call in my colleague Nicola here, who may say more.
So Nicola Hawaii, so I'm working on the HR transformation. So yeah, so I think it was a 46% return rate, which as Sarah says, actually for staff surveys is actually a very reasonable response. I'm not sure what the history is in Somerset Council, so I don't know whether you've fared better than that previously, but that's actually a reasonable response for us to be getting through a staff survey. And
I've got Councillor Ham and then Councillor Sleep. So Councillor Ham.
Thank you, Chair. My page number says 4 of 10, which is the risk summary. There's a huge.
Page 130.
It's not got 130 on it. It's just got 4 of 10. Okay, page 130. Could that risk be explained a bit, because it's a massive big risk to how we're going to afford to do things.
Sorry, which risk was that you were referring to? Which individual
Sorry,
risk on page?
It's on-
four?
4 out of 10.
Yeah.
We're on page 130, but
Yeah.
you've got,
Big red
Key
bar
risks.
there. It's,
there's R1, R2 and R3.
yeah,
That's,
basically says you can't afford to pay for all the redundancies.
Ah, the first
okay,
one.
yeah.
Okay. Yep. So I'll start and then may call on even Christian for this one, or if Nicola Hicks is on the line. So this is identified risk, which obviously these risks will have been identified at different points during the programme, and this is. So this was one that was identified quite early on in terms of going into the voluntary redundancy process, making sure that we had in place multiple mitigations to make sure that we have the sufficient budget for redundancies. As you can see, the mitigations that we've put in place. So what you've got on this risk summary is you've got what's called the inherent risk score. So that's the risk score should we do nothing. You've then got a description of the mitigations currently in place, which results in your current risk score, which is the one on the right-hand side. You've even then got your further mitigations and then a target score. Apologies for going into the detail, but I'm actually quite fond of risk management. I know that, but I think it's really, really important that actually what's important is the mitigations that we're putting in place here. So in terms of the insufficient budget for redundancy, although it's rated red and high to begin with, that is now down in terms of medium. What we are doing is we are tracking the capital receipts that we are getting in terms of being able to cover the first phase of the redundancy cost. So we have mitigations in place to have brought that risk down. I don't know whether Christian or Nicola.
Just a quick additional point to that is that it does revolve around the capitalisation directive. So we've got in principle agreement with that, but we're going through a review process with CIPFA at the moment, and to produce a transformation programme, and also around our financial resilience and the processes we've got in place from a financial perspective. So once those are agreed, then with the capitalisation directive will be agreed. But at the moment, it's only in principle, so that's at risk until it's actually agreed.
Did you want to come back at all, Councillor Ham? No. Councillor Seeb?
I'm pleased you're keen on risk management, so am I. We're going to be travelling through this, for want of a better phrase, swamp for some time, and we need to recognise the difference between things which are unknowns and things which we can control for the future, and things which have happened which we have to manage. So is it your plan to develop a risk and issues register that separates? For example, I'll give you a lovely example. One of these risks is around loss of talent. And one of the issues is that you have lost talent because it might be linked to the motivational risk, which I notice you separated out. But, if we end up in a situation where we lose key people, that's a risk for the future that's something we have to manage if we have lost them. And avoiding that is a risk that we have to manage for the future. Is it your intent to start tracking risks and issues in an integrated way?
Thank you. Yes, it is. So anything that is on the risk register that then becomes an issue, we're of course logging. In terms of that, retaining knowledge and experience, we have a really robust knowledge transfer toolkit that we're going through. So I'm going through that at the moment with a number of my staff who are leaving on voluntary redundancy. Really detailed and robust and helpful in that space. So we're mitigating this current risk as well as if it becomes an issue, being able to record that.
Councillor Osborne.
Thank you, Chairman. It is really a follow-up on Councillor Ham's question regarding the capitalisation directive. Do we actually have a timescale of when you're likely to know, once you've gone through all the steps you've outlined, as to when we will actually have that confirmed? And what are the likely conditions that may well be attached to it?
Councillor Lyshon, you indicated.
So the SIPFA review, which the government commissioned, so it's not our report, it's the government's report, those interviews are finishing this week, I believe. I had mine yesterday. It was really interesting because we talked a great deal about what this council can do, what's within our control, what's not within our control, and where we would need government agreement to do anything else. So we talked about historical council tax, for instance. The timeline for it is interesting because in this year's budget, we had what you might call a belt and braces approach to this. So we asked government for a capitalisation directive. We also put in a new policy for capital receipts flexibility. The difference between them is that a capitalisation directive allows you to borrow to pay the costs of, for instance, the transformation programme, but you then pay PWLB rates plus 1%. So not surprisingly, we took the decision to do this, and actually this overlaps into the next item on the agenda. We took the decision to sell assets to fund that rather than to borrow more because that would have cost more. So we're less concerned about the timescale on the capitalisation directive than you might think, because we believe we have belt and braces, but it's much better to have both. And actually, from what I heard yesterday, I think the SIPFA review will be of interest to us. As I said, it's not our report, but we will see it, and I think it will be helpful to us.
Thank you, Councillor Layshon. And the issue of funding via capital receipts, which I think is referred to as part of the risk mitigation to meeting the redundancy budget. I think that comes up in the next section in terms of disposal of non-operational assets. So I'll leave my questions on that till then, if I may.
Councillor Trimble.
Thank you. Now, that explanation of the risk management, this might sound really daft, but obviously the target score, because it's written and embedded in the text, I didn't realise quite what that related to, if you see what I mean. So we've got the concern or the risk of an unmotivated workforce, and even the current risk score puts us in the red, and the target score is 12, which isn't, I presume, 10 gets you into the green, so it would still be in the yellow, am I right? I don't know. I don't know what the numbers are or the categories, but it looks that way. But my concern is that yesterday I went somewhere completely different, not related to the council at all, but somewhere where a very demotivated member of staff who was very unhappy made it very clear they were very unhappy and were very, showed us a great detail how terrible things were for them. And it makes me think about the reputational damage, which isn't mentioned in that, because that is a big issue. If we are looking to recruit staff at some point going forward, if they've heard bad things or they, but whatever, I'm not going to put, because I don't know what the individual sort of complaints might be. But I think that should be mentioned as well.
I think that's a really helpful point and was raised in a meeting that I was in yesterday. So yeah, thank you for that.
Thank you. Just before I come on to those online again, a couple of queries if I could. I think it's page 127 was the first page you took us to in the monitoring. The delay of 6 weeks that you mentioned in terms of moving forward, how does that fit in? Because obviously we're working to a pretty tight timetable in terms of our financial position. So are you happy that the delay of 6 weeks is a one-off and that there aren't sort of further delays coming down the track?
Yeah, so the original timeline had September in terms of the consultation, going out to consultation on the whole of the workforce, if you like, so that still keeps us in the timeline for the 31st of March in terms of creating setting the budget for the next year. In terms of the work that is going on at the moment, lots of work going on at the moment to make sure that we hit that date. But there was meticulous planning done to say, can we still meet that 31st of March date, which is our kind of end date. I'm going to hand over to Nicola, my colleague Nicola, in case she wants to add any more detail.
Thanks, Sarah. Yeah, so just as Sarah said, what we'll be looking to do is to make sure that the restructuring is completed in time to enable the budget savings to be implemented for the next financial year. We are very carefully reviewing the progress for the work that needs to be done before we start the consultation, because it is big. It's pretty much the whole organisation. So we've got weekly check-ins with various groups so that we can very carefully monitor and manage any issues that are arising. But yes, at this point, we're confident about that timeline being met in terms of the September consultation.
And again, and it's an issue that's been raised by a number of members in terms of risk levels. When I went through the report that we've got, a number of the risk levels felt to me a little bit potentially on the low side. That some of them are really maybe at a higher level than we're looking at them where we're starting from, and then obviously that has a knock-on effect to where we're going to get. And I just wonder if you're happy that we aren't being overly. That we're not being too well. I think are we being cautious enough in terms of our risk level setting that we've got on some of these?
So we do go through as a programme steering group and as the transformation board, which is, so the transformation board is the executive leadership team plus myself, Dawn Bettridge, who is the interim service director for workforce, and Andy Cannell, who is service director for ICT, go through this on a monthly basis. So it would be really helpful to understand which ones you think should be a little higher, and we'll certainly review those in the next session.
Thank you very much. Yeah, Councillor Osborne, and then I'm going to go online.
Okay, thank you. It's just looking at the risks on page 132 and where we're covering capacity and resources and some of the risks associated with that. One of the things that was flagged, I think it was in the adult care peer review, was that in order for the transformation programme for adults transformation to work effectively and succeed, it would need a certain amount of support from the sort of corporate centre, so to speak. So in terms of that, how are we going to ensure that we retain enough capacity and resources to ensure that we don't risk compromising the transformation outcomes of the other directorates, because they all do link in, they're not siloed as such, and that is an ongoing conversation that's being had at the moment. And I'm well aware that some of the issues around siloing and opening up and cross-working, etc., may well sort of form part of some of the conversations interviews that may well happen next week. But that was a very real concern that was flagged up, and we also flagged it up at adult scrutiny as well, that we need to be very careful that we don't cut back so heavily, or more critically, lose that knowledge and talent of the interrelationships within the organisation, because it's not just up and down, it's across as well.
Thank you. Really, really important point. And one of the things that we're working on at the moment, so Christian referred to the work that we're doing around the exceptional financial support. So one of those being the SIPFA review that we're currently part of. The other thing that we're doing is we're pulling together a plan that we have to submit to government, which sets out the entirety of our approach to improvement and transformation. And as part of that, what we're looking to do is to bring it under the same umbrella, all of our work in terms of improvement and transformation. And along with that, a corporate approach, and by corporate, I mean cross-organisational. I sometimes don't use the word corporate because people think of it as corporate centre as opposed to cross-organisation. A cross-organisation agreed approach to prioritisation. So at the moment, you know, you could get pockets of work happening across the organisation, which requires resources, and that might be change resources or HR or finance or wherever. And we need to make sure that as an organisation, we are prioritising those and resourcing those appropriately. That does mean that in some cases we won't be able to do everything. Well, we've said this, haven't we, over the past few months. We won't be able to do everything we've always done. So it's even more important that we prioritise effectively in terms of where we're delivering financial savings, where we are setting the foundations for future improvement and transformation of our organisation. And we work really carefully to be one organisation. One of our values is to work as one team, so that we don't have that kind of siloed approach.
Yeah, Councillor Shearer, I think I saw a hand at the back.
Yes, forgive me for jumping in on a question that isn't actually mine, but I just thought I'd give a bit of assurance about some of the other things that are happening as well. I can't speak for adults, Sue, I'm afraid to say, but certainly from the children's side of things, I'm involved, a co-chair of the Children's Transformation Board, another board. I know there's so many of them, but we're very keen. We have an independent chair, independent of our organisation. I co-chair with him, and one of the things we're particularly keen on is exactly that question that Sarah's been describing and that you've asked very sensibly about, Sue, which is to make sure and that we don't, when we fall over these potentially what could be blocks or difficulties, because we, you know, everyone's working at different rates in different silos, we'll be working really hard to make sure that we make the cases that savings or improvements can only be made when we do have the right level of corporate support. So I just wanted to share that, and also to say personally, I'm going to step out in a minute, and I do apologise for that, but I'll come back. But just to say, I think we're trying to seek that assurance in many places.
Thank you. Councillor Chilcott, you've got your hand up online.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you for the update. Probably just a couple of concerns, and I won't be going to the risk today because we've had some really good questions on risk, and it's great that people are noticing and taking that on board. But this is about cuts, and we can call it cuts, reductions, downsizing, however we like it. And I'm just got, for me, there are some emerging concerns. That loss of talent, I think, is a major concern. And my first question is, we've talked a lot about the redundancy, voluntary, etc. What we haven't really talked about, that loss of talent, people that are just leaving, not as part of this reorganisation. So my first question is, if they are in key roles, are we still recruiting into those? That's my first question.
So we have, as people know, we've got things in place in terms of recruitment to make sure that we are still able to recruit. So there isn't a recruitment freeze at the moment, and there is a process, the ERCB process, that people have to go through to put their sort of business case forward, if you like. So we are still able to recruit to key roles if that process is followed and there is agreement given that those roles should be filled. Obviously, because we are about to be entering a restructuring process, that would be a consideration as well, because we do need to be mindful of the fact that there are going to be people who are potentially at risk of redundancy, and we need to make sure that opportunities will be available for those people. So, but we're not stopping. There is no recruitment freeze at the moment.
Thank you. That's really reassuring, because as I've said, I've heard of a number that have just gone and we are talking a lot about this process, but that throws out challenges with people sort of, I'm sure, feeling vulnerable, especially when they're not sure about job roles moving forward. And my second question really is that risk of stability within teams. My understanding is that in some teams, almost all of the staff are at risk. And I'm just wondering what support there is, because I think that would give some really uneasy feelings for staff. Especially as the time that they're not knowing sort of goes on and on for them, and when are they likely to actually have, when are we like to have all roles confirmed then? I'm asking that, I suppose, following up that staff question we had earlier.
Just to take the first or well, actually the last point is that so we're looking at the week commencing the 30th of September to launch consultation, which will include all the structure charts in that for all the teams. So in terms of the numbers at risk, I am going to hand over to Nicola.
Yeah, so we haven't got all the information yet. We're working through that, and we're doing the HR mapping process at the moment so that we can be clear about what the impact will be on all individuals, and we're working very closely with service directors to do that. So the full picture isn't yet known, and that's the work that will be done before we actually start the consultation week commencing 30th of September. So but in terms of support, we've been planning for this for some time. So one of the key work streams within the workforce part of the transformation programme is supporting people through change. So we've given a lot of priority and a lot of focus around this. And what we've done is we've created, I think in total, there's about 12 different sort of personas, if you like, so that we can identify the different scenarios that people will be in. So there's those people who are going through voluntary redundancy and who may or may not have got it, but we've also got those people who now may be at risk moving forward in terms of compulsory redundancy. But there's also those people who will be staying. So what we've been doing is looking at the different scenarios and situations that people will find themselves in and making sure that the right support is available. So there will be a lot of support. We've got, both to help people with any internal process they may need to go through, but also if they are then made redundant on a compulsory basis. So, and that support is being constantly publicised and will continue to be. So we're also going to be running a number of roadshows as well later in the year as well, so there can be actual drop-in sessions for people to attend.
Thank you. So I suppose the question is, I understand the process and there are some months to go on it. My question was really around at what point will all the staff know, whether they're going to have a position or not within the organisation. So you've talked about the start of consultation. When is that likely to come to an end? So staff will know and understand what their future will be.
So it'll be a 45-day consultation process. So it'll be mid-November when people will know we'll have to review obviously the feedback that comes in through consultation. So it'll be sort of end of November, beginning of December when we'll be able to give the final position.
Okay, so all being well by Christmas, our staff should all know. Fabulous, thank you. And I think there'll be much relief for everybody when that position's reached. My last question actually is around, we've talked an awful lot in all meetings about HR understandably, but the other side of that is there will be some elements of services we've already been told we will just not be able to deliver with a huge reduction in staff numbers. So for me, the devil's in the detail, and certainly what I'm getting asked by towns, parishes, residents is, what will the council look like? And my question to you is, will councillors have a say in what we are going to deliver, and more importantly for our residents, what we're not?
Thank you for that question. So two things. The first thing to say is that as part of this process, we have been capturing where there may be any service level impacts in terms of any of the proposals that are coming forwards. We're also reviewing those. We've got a what we've called subject matter experts review group. This is something that we set up during the medium-term financial planning process, and we were setting our budget and proposing savings for this year's budget. So similar people, so you've got democratic services, you've got equality, diversity, inclusion in there, etc. And so making sure that we've got we're identifying service level impacts and also the equality impacts in that space. Any changes, I think we maybe mentioned this at executive, but maybe we haven't mentioned it at scrutiny, but any changes to service standards that would require a member decision will be coming to executive for that member decision, and so will come through scrutiny as part of that process.
Thank you. And I was actually looking at the milestone timeline, and I can see very little councillor public involvement in that programme. So that was why I asked the question. And I think for me, what we don't want is to find things end up in the executive and there hasn't been a full and open conversation about them. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Coles.
Thank you very much, Chair. But Sarah and her colleagues have answered my questions in some of their replies. So thank you for that.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm not seeing any other comments from around the room. So again, thank you very much for the information that you've given us to keep us abreast of where we're moving forward. I think again, just for as has been highlighted in the comments that have come out from members, we need to be ensuring that we're working to the timetable and making sure the delivery is actually coming through and that we're being informed as to how that is progressing, either on target or not. We need to know that as soon as possible. Certainly the issue about the loss of staff and the impact on our employees is important, that we need to know that that is being handled in a way that people are being supported where that is needed. And also the last comment that was made about the service level impact. And again, I think we'll need to work out how that comes to scrutiny and whether it is just this scrutiny or whether in fact other scrutinies who are seeing the services in their areas, they need to be aware of that process and how that fits into the timetable. So as I say, we're partway down the road. We've got still a fair way to go, but there's an awful lot of work to cover. So thank you very much for what you've done so far. And again, if we can keep ourselves informed so that we can help you and feed into that process. Thank you. Members, I was going to suggest, because I've had a few, I've caught a few expressions around the room, I'm going to suggest we take a short 10-minute comfort break and allow people to stretch their legs, and then we will restart at 22. No worries. If we turn to agenda item 8, which is page 137 in your papers, which is the disposal of non-operational assets. Just one thing, just to remind members, as you're well aware, we've had circulated with this, the appendices is a confidential appendices. We can have this item as a public item, not getting into any detail about details of things like legal covenants or financial side. We will have to exclude the confidential session. All the time we keep the meeting talking about the items themselves, but not those parts of it, the finance and legal side, then we're okay. Right. Councillor Lashon, I think you're going to introduce this to start with.
Thank you, Chair. I'll start with the apologies from my colleague, Councillor Ross White, who has too many meetings today. She has been online for some of the meeting, but not all. So I just wanted to remind committee members of the different forms of disposal of assets that this council is undertaking. There is, of course, the devolution of assets to parish, town and city councils. There is the sale of commercial investments, which is covered under the executive subcommittee. And then there is the disposal of non-operational assets that we see with today's paper. So this all needs to be seen in the context of us going into the huge transformational programme for this council, for the capitalisation directive that we asked government for and that we've already discussed earlier this morning, where we took the decision not to borrow more money from PWLB at increased rates, but rather to dispose of assets to fund that programme of work. So some of these assets will have been discussed with parish towns, city councils. For many of them, there is an individual story. So if I may, Chair, hand over to Oliver Woodhams. He's able to give us a detailed introduction. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Woodlands.
Thank you, Councillor Lation. We'll move into take questions, and my colleague Charlie Field, who's Head of Estates Strategy and Development, is here to answer questions as well. But just to try and give you an overview, as Councillor Lation has said, this is one strand of a large disposal programme, and it's one where we've put a lot of time into selecting the assets. That's done through review by officers in my team, and then through the asset management group, in accordance with our disposals policy that came to scrutiny before Christmas. So there's a lot of thought that's gone into these and selecting these, and I'll come and sort of try and explain some themes there. And all of these assets have been declared surplus, i.e. they are available to be sold or disposed of by asset management group. And so we're bringing them forward to scrutiny. They will then go to the executive, and the main paper you have before you is the draft executive report, and that will be published shortly for executive to consider. So what we're really interested in today is scrutiny's feedback and any particular points and comments that you would like to make to executive. We have also shared detail on the individual assets with local members, and there's a long list of local members at the bottom of the report. They've all received details of the assets that are being proposed for sale in their division, and relevant towns and parish councils have also been informed, and where requested copies of plans have been made available, those plans will all be published. The executive report, we didn't quite get them ready in time for, but they are available should anyone need them. There are 22 assets on the list. They broadly fall into sort of 4 areas, and these have been chosen with regard to our need to raise funds, but also with regard to the impact of these decisions on the future of the county, people who live and work here. So we've chosen these assets carefully for financial reasons, but there's also been a lot of thought gone into the strategic and non-financial rationale behind the selection. So there's a group of assets, and there's large and small sites on this list that I would loosely term as older legacy industrial estates. These are tenanted properties. So we've got the Blackdown Business Park, Roughmore, Barnes Close in Dulverton, and the Yeovil Small Business Centre. These are industrial sites let out to small businesses of one sort or another, that the council or the legacy councils have owned for a long time. They are no longer run actively as part of our economic development enterprise centre offerings. So there is no active economic development. They are in essence sort of legacy commercial assets, and they're non-operational from that perspective. So we've taken a decision to sort of look to dispose these. They will be disposed on a going concern basis for existing use, so nothing will change. All the leases and the terms of those leases will remain in place, and the businesses in these units and business centres will just have a new landlord that won't be the council. So we see that as having a limited impact and the right thing to do. There are always concerns in that sort of decision for us around what yield do we get from these sites, what investment is needed in the sites over the sort of medium term, what's affordable for us in our current financial situation for that investment. So we've weighed all that up, there will be a loss of income associated with this disposal, but from a kind of yield perspective, it's the right decision, we think, taking into account our capital strategy and the need to raise capital financing as an alternative to borrowing. So that's the first group. The second group I'd broadly characterise as development land. There are 3 smaller sites that are all from the County Council legacy agricultural estate, so Open Downs Farm and Lees Farm, where we have some consent on old farm buildings that would otherwise be largely unsuitable for continued use because they need one sort of investment or another, and we have planning consent or the potential for planning consent on those sites, so we're looking to dispose of those. And there's larger sites at Evercreech and the northern part of the Firepool development. And for those of you that know Firepool, this is the land to the north of Canal Way, so not the main site, which are ready to bring to market for development. So there's again no impact on operations for that, but there would be a change in the use of that land associated with development, we would anticipate, as a result of the sale. We've got 4 sites that are open agricultural land and will be sold, like the industrial estates, will be sold on the basis of existing use. So they would carry on as farmland, and that's very unlikely to get planning consent on any of these sites. So land at Splat in the Quantocks, Spaxton, land at Forton near Chard, land at Ash and Martock, and land at Castle Carey. There is some development potential for the land at Ash, we think, but that will be covered by covenants and things. Those 4 sites we feel are sort of non-core agricultural land sites, so they're not part of our larger holdings, and they're not suitable for either use for the council for strategic use for biodiversity net gain or phosphates mitigation. They've all been assessed for that. There is a small part of one of the holdings that will be retained because we think it does have some potential for phosphates mitigation, but otherwise we don't see any potential there. And we also don't consider these sites to be of use in realising the council's ambition to create opportunities for new entrants to farming. They don't have suitable farm buildings, and so we don't see these as constraining those ambitions in any way. And then the final group I would characterise as surplus operational land. So this is where either through a change in a service and the way that's provided, or through active property rationalisation, or just a reduction in need, assets that were used for operational reasons are no longer required for those operational reasons. A real mixture here. We've got the 5 Ways site in Yeovil, which used to be a transport hub and learning disabilities day centre. The Learning Disabilities Day Centre closed down some time ago. The transport hub we have rationalised and moved to Somerton in a new facility, so that site's now surplus. C Block has been surplus to requirements. It is still being used by one team, but we're relocating them shortly, and that site is ready for redevelopment. 2 small sites at North Street in Wellington and South Street in Wiveliscombe, and then one of the car parks in Taunton, which, due to our parking strategy and also just a general sort of analysis of usage, we think that that's not required. People use it for parking, but that parking can be displaced to other sites with no overall impact, and that site will be released for development. So those are all sort of operational sites that, for one reason or another, we don't think we need anymore. And then the observant amongst you will have noticed that I've missed 2 out of those 4 groups. So the Bowden Mill and Bowden Centre in Chard, they're 2 separate sites that are part of the same sort of land holding. They stand in a bit of a category of their own, I think. And these are land holdings that South Somerset District Council obtained a long time ago from, I think, the RDA at the time for regeneration purposes. We will still continue to work with colleagues in the regeneration team on this area. And if any opportunities do come forward, this decision will not sort of close down those opportunities to do something where we have more control over those sites. But there is no, having worked with the regeneration team for a long time, colleagues do not see any immediate potential at the moment for regeneration through a partnership approach. So what we've agreed with regeneration, and we're going to take our time over the disposal here, so this may change, but at the moment we feel that these sites are best led by the asset management team rather than the regeneration team, because there's really no funding available to address the viability issues there. So we're going to look to a more private sector led approach rather than a partnership or government funding led approach, and that's really the decision there. So I hope that's helpful in terms of answering some general questions, and we're quite happy to go into any questions on any individual sites or just generally sort of broader strategy here.
Okay, thank you very much. What I'm proposing to do, members, is if we can take general questions first in terms of the process and how this is working, and then we'll probably try and follow through on the papers that you've got starting on page 148 has got the various sites listed. We'll just go through and ask if there's any issues about particular ones that want to be raised. So if I could ask members to indicate if there's any comments or questions they have at this point in terms of the general process. I've got Councillor Hobhouse to go first, and I'll look for other hands. Thanks.
Thank you very much indeed. I have been told about a 106 sale that is happening in Alresford. It's not on this list. Nobody sent me an email telling me you were doing anything else in Castle Carey. Have you informed all the local members of what is happening in their areas so that they can actually deal with it or talk to people who need to talk about it?
Yes, we have informed all local members, so hopefully you have had an email about the land in Castle Carey. We've done that on an individual asset basis ahead of this report being published. So we'll have to pick that up if you haven't received that and see what's gone wrong there, Councillor Hobhouse, but certainly we sent all those emails.
So how do you explain that you got Castle Carey in here without an email having come to me?
Yeah, just got a couple of quick questions. The sale of these assets, I presume, is around the capitalisation that the central government allowed us to do. Was there a limit on how much that figure was? So we got 22 items for sale today, and there's lots of stuff being sold to parishes and that. Is there a final figure where that stops? And the second question was, are there any other assets other than these 22 that they may bring forward, or are there some that they've decided definitely not to bring forward? What also, has anybody calculated the loss of income from selling these assets?
Councillor Lyshon, did you want to go first on that?
Yeah, if I could just explain the asset management group, that might help. That asset management group was set up differently from the previous strategic asset group under the previous administration. So it is chaired by the lead member, Councillor Ros Wyke, and Councillor Bill Revens and I are also on the asset management group. So anything that is to be declared surplus and then able to be offered for sale has to come through the asset management group. and it goes through a decision-making process then. That is the declaring surplus. In the past, when there were smaller numbers of disposals, that would have been a non-key or a key decision taken by officers or the lead member, depending on the amount. And that would have been done then, subject to call-in, as some of us will remember. This is a different approach. This is a different time and a completely different approach. So by putting all of these into the one paper, and bringing it to scrutiny and then to executive for decision is something that the leader of council, Bill Revans, was particularly keen that we should do. It doesn't mean that other assets cannot be disposed of through other routes, particularly smaller assets, but this is us trying to be more transparent in the work that we have to do in order to create a more viable council for the future. So have I missed anything there, Chair?
I think in terms of the capitalisation amount, is there a cap?
Interestingly, a number of councils that have applied for capitalisation directive then haven't taken it. And in my SIPFA interview yesterday, that was stressed again, that some councils apply for capitalisation directive and then take part of it or none of it. Some actually work under a capital receipts flexibility policy that I referenced earlier. There is the figure that we applied for, and that will be what the SIPFA review is dealing with. They're very different. There was a whole list published some time ago of all the councils that had applied and the amounts that was on the government's website. I'm sure we could find that again and circulate it to all members of the committee.
And in terms of my understanding from what you're saying is that this is a list of those assets that are currently being considered. This is not necessarily an exhaustive list of those that could be considered.
This is the list that is coming forward to executive for decision, and therefore that's why it's here today.
Councillor Ham.
You come back, what was the figure that we actually applied for?
Wish I could remember exactly. You'll recall that we set the budget with a capitalisation directive figure and a use of reserves figure. I'll go back to the budget papers now and get the exact figures for you.
I think I stand to be corrected, but I think wasn't there a discussion about there was a 40 million and then an additional 40 million to help cover the redundancy costs was the maximum. But yeah. I've got Councillor Coles.
Thank you, Chair. Just a couple of first question, which I'm hoping will lead into the second question. We are conscious that interest rates are starting to come down. In another organisation, I was told a couple of days ago that they expect interest rates to be falling quite considerably by the end of this year, and certainly by the end of this financial year. They expect them to be quite considerably lower than they are now, which I think is a good idea. So I want to make sure, I want to be reassured if I can, that we are looking at that so that where there is an opportunity to invest a little money in not necessarily any of these sites, but other sites to produce a much higher income. Charlie, you of all people know that you sprinkle the fairy dust of planning permission on a piece of land and it increases its value by a huge number. So I would look where we have land that we own that might be suitable for development, that we look at considering putting planning permission on it before disposal, because it would increase we are the planning authority, we can bring things through reasonably quickly, and that would enable you to gain a much higher return on that. And also, sorry, do you want to swap?
The mic, because we've got off camera.
Okay. Okay, I'll use this mic. Is that better? My apologies. Yeah, so I want to ensure that we are looking at all ways to maximise the return that we can reasonably get from whatever disposal it is. And it doesn't matter whether that's a shop unit in the high street or whether it's 5,000 acres of something. And I'm deliberately going from one extreme to the other because I'm not trying to pinpoint anything. I also want to ensure that we have an uplift clause on anything we sell, and that if all else fails, we look at holding a ransom strip or two, because I think these are really, really important decisions for this authority to make, and we have to make sure that we get the best possible value to return to all our residents. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. No worries.
So I just come
Charlie.
back to that. So thank you. So I think in the balance of when we look to sell, yes, we look to maximise value, and some sites we are working on active planning consent. Some will have we're subject to planning, so that will affect the value, and so bids might be based on that. And there's a difference between selling with planning consent and us funding the cost of getting planning consent to those there. There's balancing what the market might pay for something with planning, or the hope it might attach to it. Some people might put more hope value on things. Generally, we will look to have a covenant on most sales, and occasionally it'll alternatively be an uplift. There are different mechanisms, and they have an effect on people's ability to borrow money against when they're charged. It's quite complex, so that does have an impact. Every time we do take those into consideration.
Yes, thank you. I'm aware of those constraints. As Chair of Planning, I'm familiar with most of them.
Yeah, I would just come in and address the sort of broader point you made at the beginning, Councillor Coles, as well, about changes in interest rates. I think, as Charlie said, the kind of planning consent position is very much a case-by-case thing. We have a real expert in the room to make those commercial judgments. We are also looking, and we plan to sit down and review this with the next incoming interim Section 151 officer, but we do need to review the basis of our strategy, particularly when it comes to those yield figures, the yield thresholds we're working to at the moment. So we set a capital strategy before Christmas, and as part of the budget setting, we are working to that capital strategy at the moment. Interest rates haven't really moved since then, but the prognosis is changing. And I think when it comes to any disposal of an income-bearing asset, we need to keep an eye on the differential between what we might be able to borrow at, what we might, how the budget position overall might be changing, and what the income threshold below which we sell is. We're working to the capital strategy we had at the moment. We're working on the basis of an 80 million total this year, roughly half and half capitalisation direction and capital receipts flexibilities to fund the transformation programme, and then 100 million next year. But we need to review those assumptions, and we plan to do that at officer level with our new Section 151 officer when they arrive.
Thank you. Councillor Longchamp.
I found the paper, sorry. Having said to Christian Evans, it's fine, you go back and get on with your work. I could have done with him right then. Under the exceptional financial support, February 24 as part of budget setting, the application was made to government on the 11th of January of this year, 77.9 million, 37.9 million to balance the 24-25 budget. That is along with the earmarked reserves that we used, and 40 million for the planned reduction in workforce that was referenced by committee members. That 40 million for the reduction in workforce and the costs of redundancies, because of the consultation and when that ends and when those redundancies are made, and with people's notice period, some of that I'm suspecting will go across the year end into this year, some into next year. That's a job for the new 151 officer, but those figures are very clearly in our budget setting papers. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I've got a number of members in the room who've indicated already, so Councillor Seeb, Osborne, Trimnall and Soughton. But I just wondered if I could come to Ms. Worslake. Were you able to find anything in terms of the question from Councillor Hobhouse? Thank you very much. Councillor Seeb.
Thank you. I noticed some of the disposals are with a particular partner, housing providers, for example, and other ones are just open market. I was wondering what the trade-off is between the two and how you're choosing that strategy.
Thank you. Primarily, those have been led by the wish to deliver or to see delivery of affordable housing, and that's where we've been. Yeah, that those have been concentrated on those who might have that and have the funding through Homes England or other grants available.
And why would you be choosing open markets? Is it just simply that some people have approached you with particular interests?
So yes, we have been working in partnership with them. I suppose we've been doing sales to parties who particularly deliver, as I said, affordable housing in the main, and the funding streams that come with there. We try not to, I mean, in theory, to affordable housing providers shouldn't really pay much. You know, should we enforce competition for delivery of affordable housing? So that's where that's been.
Just for clarity, my issue is why would you be simply putting stuff on the open market? I understand why the housing providers are interested. The reality is, usually with land, somebody somewhere is willing to pay a premium for it if they've got an interest in it. And I'm also conscious that in many of the areas of land that we are talking about that you've put to the open market, there's already quite a lot of land on the market in that area. So there's quite a lot of competition for buyers, shall we say. It's a buyer's market rather than a seller's market. The council, certainly in its previous incarnations, had a long history of finding somebody and doing a private deal because that was quicker and released the money quicker. And as the release of money is absolutely core to this, it just seemed to me unexpected to just see so much of it without an obvious partner. That was just, you know, what was it? Is it just you lack an idea that's leaving it, you know, as a default, it goes to the open market? Because I don't like paying middlemen either.
So the default position is that, you know, there will be an open market sale of one sort or another. That's not necessarily an auction. There's a lot of work that goes into developing buyer interest and working with particular buyers prior to that. But the principle is it's open to anyone. That is quite critical in meeting a test of best consideration, which is a legal test we have to meet. And this is largely driven by the need to deliver, you know, the most funding that we can to meet the financing issues that we have. So the majority of the sales will be one sort of an open market sale of one sort or another. I think where, you know, the Evercreech land is an example where we're not doing that. That is, as Charlie's explained, an affordable housing led development. We don't expect that one to come in this financial year. It's going to take a long time. And we believe there is the potential to use that for to support our social care objectives as well, to support our social housing objectives. That's an example of a sale that isn't just about receiving best consideration, and we do have the ability to sell it undervalue. There will be, and as we get into the process, there will be a careful valuation of the site and make sure we're meeting legal tests, but we're able to take decisions to sell it undervalue where it meets those kind of social benefits. So that's why we're doing that there. But we are probably more so than we have in the past looking at a primarily financial driver for this. There'll be more open market sales as a result.
Yes, just to come back, I think you've really eloquently explained why in this particular instance, best value is not necessarily the highest sale price. Sometimes it's an earlier sale or a sale which has social value attached. Is our current strategy adequate in informing you on the trade-off between those factors? Because I think at the time it was being written, we had doubts as to whether we'd actually expressed ourselves clearly enough as to how Hine trades with price, because actually we do need the cash this year, for example, and you've been given a value to meet this year. Does our strategy actually lay that out well enough for you to make a good choice? Because it just felt to me, looking at some of these, as somebody who's been in this game for a while, I did think some of the sales looked like ones I was surprised to see labelled open market, because that usually puts because they were in weak markets where there's a lot of buyer power and not much seller power, and secondly because they are where relationships already exist, and in the past I would have expected them to be exploited to get an earlier sale, perhaps to get some social value out of it as well, but an earlier sale being the key thing. And I was just wondering, is our strategy actually helping you in that regard? Does it give you enough to work with?
Yes, thank you. I think it does. I mean, as on this paper, there are properties there that have been in discussion for some time with parties, and there are properties there that have had no discussions with anyone. So so on this paper, there's some advanced thinking on some because they've been in the process and we've identified, and the others, we've made the decision those are not for keeping. And that we're just starting that journey to look for buyers and to work out how we test the market, push the market, and just
I think our asset management strategy is a high level document setting out. This was agreed by full council back in February 2023, and it's still extant. It sets out the objectives we are trying to achieve, and in any given year, those objectives, some objectives will be more important than others, and certainly we're seeing that with the financial imperative we have at the moment coming to the fore a bit more than it has done in previous years, and our need to raise financing. But that variation, in addition to happening sort of from year to year, will have more affordability to consider social objectives in other years, hopefully, if good times come back to Somerset. They're also different from asset to asset as well, and it really is a case by case strategy. And that interrelationship between the need to raise financing, the strategic value of not doing things now and waiting either commercially or for other reasons, and the kind of social opportunities, the social benefit opportunities we have. It's that kind of balance between those three themes that are the real discussions we have at Asset Management Group at that stage, to sort of set individual strategies for individual assets according to the context of the council, that the overarching financial strategy, and each individual case in point. And I think, in my experience, that is happening. There is a richer discussion going on there than there ever has been before, because we are looking at so much. We have a good strategy in place and a good process in place.
I think I'll just quickly add to that. An example would be that one of the reasons why we would seek to have Bowden Mill put on this list to be disposed of. It was a regeneration project. There's no longer the monies within the council to regenerate it ourselves. It allows us to have a clear setting that it's to be disposed of. It allows us now to engage and find the right place and market for it at the right speed. So it's not we're going to get rid of it tomorrow. We'll now be able to, you know, move in a direction to find its best opportunity.
Thank you. I'm going to go to Councillor Osborne.
Thank you, Chairman. I think some of my questions might go into confidential, but this one probably won't. And it follows on, I guess, from where Councillor Steve was going in terms of how do you make the decision, particularly with the county farmland, in terms of what goes to auction, because that's a very transparent way of doing things, and what is going for sale on the open market, and perhaps clarity on what exactly open market is and how that differentiates from private treaty sale. I know some of the private treaty sale was not without controversy, and I can remember a particular instance in going back a number of years where there was freedom of information requests flying around and I was getting told all sorts over a particular sale of a county farm that wasn't without controversy. What I'd like to know is how have you decided between what goes for auction, what doesn't? Also, what is the current policy on county farms? Bearing in mind that the current administration in its manifesto made and this was before financial emergency, I accept that, made a commitment to looking at developing the county farm estate. So I'd like to know how much of it is going to be left net of these sales, because there's roughly 200 to 300 acres about to be sold. And I think it had already got down to less than 2,000 acres. So what is now going to be the policy and the strategy with county farms? Are we now moving into an era where we are looking at quiet disposal of it over a number of years? Because it seems a long time since this was dealt with, and also the policy of how the land from that estate is disposed of. Up to 2018, everything went for auction. After 2018, it seemed to sort of go towards private treaty and various other ways. So it would be helpful to have clarity in the interest of transparency on that, because disposal of land does get emotive.
I don't know whether you want to take the technical side, and then I'll come to Councillor Lyshawn for the. You want to go first? Okay.
I'll go first, just on the manifesto promise, which is a fair point, and we are in a very different position than we were when I remember sitting and putting together the manifesto with Councillor Bill Revans. There are lots of other things that we can achieve through a county estate. It doesn't have to be the acreage as it sits at 1980, 1990, 2010. That one of the things we've talked about as an executive and administration is that ability to purchase land that can fulfil things that we really need, and biodiversity net gain would be one of them. So the county farm estate is nothing like it was after the First World War, I think, was when it started being put together, and it has changed a great deal. If you told me it was something that we need to look at in more detail, I'd probably agree with you and suggest that we need to put that in the list of things. That I do recall that coming to what was then place scrutiny and having a task and finish group at that time back in 2018, and some of the people are in the room now. We are in a different place now. I'm not suggesting that. To be fair, I'm really not suggesting that officers have time for a task and finish group at the moment, but we do have to understand that is an area we do all want to look at.
Was there any comment you want to make on the financial side? That was the first part of the question.
I think probably Charlie might be best placed to cover the point about what kind of open market sale are we talking about when we're talking about. I think cancellations cover the point about the manifesto commitment. I don't think we've got anything to add to that.
No, I think the point on we've given an indicative thought on the list as how they might be sold. Ultimately, Where possible, we will always seek to obtain the best price, and sometimes it's about how do we do it. Yes, auction is a popular mode because it brings things to a certain day for completion to happen on a certain day, and to a degree you can hope that by that close of play you will have the money in your bank, and if you can line it up. The disadvantage with auction is that someone only needs to pay £1 more than someone else. And there's sometimes quite often interest by people who might pay a few more pounds, and it's how you get to that point. And I suspect we'll be using a combination. The market has moved on in the ability to be able to sell properties. You can bring by tender, saying getting a formal tender is a complicated position, and it normally requires the bidder to put forward money in a banker's draft or otherwise, and their bid might not be successful, and people don't like doing this because property values have hugely changed in 20 years, and so we will be looking to do a combination of mechanisms that we will seek to ensure that we try and get the best price for that property at that time.
Councillor Osborne.
Yes, thank you. I would certainly say that was one of my suggestions, but Liz beat me to it. Was I think not a task and finish because the estate was lost in 2018 when you basically probably took it below critical mass by selling those 8 significant holdings. I've got the scars on my back and I'll probably always carry them. However, I do think we should know, because it is 6 years now, exactly what the size of the holding is. Do the plans that you had for what was retained and what was going to be disposed, is that still relevant today? And would that holding list change? Do you need it to change? What land has got potential for, as we say, biodiversity net gain credits, phosphate credits, and God knows what else, because we're moving into a different era, and what needs to be kept for food production, because food security is important, and also the opportunity loss of value of land, where good agricultural land at the moment, certainly in this part of the world, there is still a very strong demand for, and I think most of the valuers will tell you that. But if you take it out to fallow it as per the land at Donyat to support the Persimmon development, there would be a loss of capital value on that, because a field that's fallowed and you can't do anything with it for the next God knows how many years, it's going to command considerably less capital value than one that is productive and can be farmed. So I think there are things in there that do need to be looked at, do need, I think, to come to this committee, because say it is so long, and I think we do need to have a look at that, bearing in mind there was that manifesto commitment. We know times have changed dramatically, and we also know the county farmers has sold, and by gradually nibbling away with 50 acres here and 70 there, and God knows what somewhere else, you will find that you will wind up with a very, very scattered holding, and no amount of land purchase will put it back together again. I think the battle for county farms was lost. What we're looking at is what do we do with the rump of it, and how do we manage it effectively for the good of the council as a whole.
Thank you.
I'd say in answer that the first thing we need to do is to create a viable council, and then a stable council, and then we can create the council that we want and look more carefully at all of the assets of the council. But in order to create the viable council, we are having to make what the leader called unprecedented and in places heartbreaking decisions. And I know lots of people who've worked land and worked on the land, and actually that land becomes part of them and their family. And I do understand that it's painful, but I can assure you that in the asset management group, the chair of that group, Councillor Ros White, asks every single question about a land holding, about the land holding of the council surrounding it. So terrier maps for every piece of land in the area, and she asks for every opportunity for every piece of land before, as an asset management group, we consider its opportunity and indeed its risks. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Trimnell.
Thank you, Chair. So I've got a bit of a pick and mix of questions, if that's okay. My first one, you spoke in the presentation about different groups of sales, so things that were being sold in different ways for different reasons. It's a shame, I think, that that wasn't reflected in here, because I'm sort of looking through and thinking, well, which is what? And I think it would have been good to have grouped them together and defined them in the report that we were sent. So that's not a question, that's just a point. I was going to talk about farms as well, because I have a great concern at the moment in seeing farms being decommissioned for phosphate mitigation. We know that there's a lot of issues for farmers, with people blaming them for climate change issues and things, and so we need, and we're losing that sort of support for farming in many ways. And I don't want to see an end result where selling farms off is an easy thing to do, but actually it causes us problems in the long run, because I think what you were saying about the fact that you cannot put it back together eventually when we need to is a really important point. And we know that actually getting into farming is quite difficult now. So with the farms that are being sold, where you said that they weren't in sort of, you know, they weren't likely to be able to be used as farms anymore, I wondered who made that decision, whether anybody interested in buying farms had actually looked at them and said, God, no, you couldn't run this anymore. It's beyond it. It's usability, as it were. So I just wondered who made that decision, or was it just that it's more expedient or better to be sold as development land or phosphate credit land? The receipts, so on page 114, it says that the receipts are approximately £30 million, but some financial risks and planning assumptions which may require mitigation. And I wondered if you could talk a little bit more about that in terms of those planning assumptions, because obviously I think it was Councillor Coles who said that actually having planning permission on land makes a difference to its value. Also, some of the purchases could be even pre-1974. And I wondered whether we were likely to find there's a lower risk of selling these assets on at a rate where we don't make back our money, purely because we bought them cheaply many years ago. So is there anything that we're likely to lose money on? And then I suppose the tenants that are in some of those assets at the moment, some of them actually we're taking quite a healthy income from. Are they likely to leave because their buildings are being sold and it's easier to make the decision yourself? And are we going to lose income before sale, or have we negotiated with current tenants to say we are selling these or your building for an ongoing purpose? And then if there's a time frame for sale, that would be really useful. So I'm sorry there's so many bits, but I've waited a while.
Touch on a couple of these and then hand over to Charlie. So I think you probably asked Councillor Trimnell why have the farms sites been chosen, and this touches on the points that Councillor Osborne was making as well. You know, obviously a number of decisions have been taken in the past. That includes the sale of land to Persimmon. This report is about that, so I'll restrict my comments to the sites that we're bringing forward today, and we may come back for a wider discussion on strategy another time. But yeah, just to reassure you that I think that the 4 sites that are open land sales, so this is agricultural land, it's not for development, it will continue to be farmed. That's our assumption, so there's no impact on food production there. They've been chosen because they are the sort of scattered sites that in part that Councillor Osborne referred to. They're not part of our core remaining land holding around the Donyat area, and they also we don't feel that they're suitable for ambition to create opportunities for new tenants either. So that's the basis on which those 4 bare land sites have been chosen, and they will be sold as farmland on the open market with appropriate covenants, but really with no realistic prospect of any development happening. The other sites are much smaller in acreage terms, and they're generally dilapidated buildings that where we've done individual agreements with tenants, so there's no real impact on the tenant, or there is a sale to the tenant in one case, I think. And so there's no impact on the tenancy for a wider land holding that will be retained, and there's an opportunity for us to get out of a liability suitable that isn't building sites that aren't suitable for modern use as kind of support for new entrants, and to realise a capital receipt through redevelopment because of planning uplift, as Councillor Coles mentioned earlier. So hopefully that addresses the kind of decision-making framework around sites that are in this paper, which I think was one of the questions you had. In terms of the sort of overall timing, we're looking at sales that will either, and some of this detail is in the confidential appendix, so I won't go into that detail, but broadly we're looking at sales that either are going to complete, we think, in this year, or this financial year, the latter half of this financial year now, clearly, or in the next financial year. But sales subject to planning can, there's a big risk there on those timing decisions. So the way to mitigate that risk is to make sure that in terms of the financing assumptions we're making for financial planning, we're going to market with more, and we are across the different disposal programmes than we need for financing. So we're not depending on one planning decision going our way in a particular quarter to kind of finance the council's position, and that's the mitigation to that overall risk. It happens at a kind of macro level. And I think in terms of anything that we're going to lose money on, it's quite difficult to comment. I don't know if you've got a general comment, bearing in mind we're in public session, Charlie, on that, and any in particular impacts on tenants. You want to add to that?
No, I think that most properties were bought at market value at the time and will be selling at market value, unless they've been bought with subsidy or otherwise that we had at the time. But I'm not aware of any that spring to mind. Yes, we seek for those types of property where it's important to have a tenancies in and in place and tenancies signed up. Yes, that's what we need to do to maximise value. There's other properties where they would sell better where they're vacant, and we'll manage that accordingly.
Councillor Sound.
Thank you, Chairman. Some of my questions have kind of been asked really by previous members. However, I'm going to apologise if my question is slightly contradictory in itself, but I note from the report that there are certain assets on there that are going through the process of sale, shall we say, subject to planning. And when we look at the cost in the report of that, perhaps, and the fact that we already own that land, I'm trying to get my head around how the decision's been made to dispose of that when there's an end social use to that, or social benefit to that, and why I understand that why we're doing what we're doing, obviously for the sale of the assets and the financial situation we're in. But like I said, forgive if this is contradictory in itself, but I'm just trying to get my head around why some assets have been picked that we could, for a social benefit as an authority, being that we own that land already, we could develop that for the end use that some of those parcels of land are there for at the moment. Sorry if that's a bit muddled, but
no, I perfectly understand the question. I think there it's about understanding how the land lies. So we, as a unitary authority, are the planning authority, and planning is led by a local plan and supply of land, and there's the historic plans available for each district, and obviously the new unitary authority has an obligation to put in place a new local plan within 5 years. at the moment, obviously, there's a land supply issue. Now, I don't think it's incumbent on this authority to be applying for planning for land that's not within the local plan, because it's sort of a contrary with itself. Now, we could quite clearly, the land can be identified as likely to be having with, but I think it's for a third party to apply, and that's why we might work in with someone else to apply for the cost and risk of applying for planning that's not within land that has been identified for housing. Because the local plan is, the housing land supply is well, we're under supply, and therefore there's an opportunity in planning terms to pick and choose other sites, and I think that's the. Know whether that helps or not, but I'm trying to give an explanation as to the complexities.
And I think just to come in on the point about development for social value, so we look very carefully generally before the decision is taken to declare something surplus. So everything on this list is after that decision about whether there's anything we can use sites for. Good example, the Homes for Horizons programme was mentioned earlier on in today. One of those 8 homes is a site that we could have chosen to add onto this list, Greenway Farm, but we are instead retaining it and developing it as one of the children's homes. That's costing a lot of money because the building's pretty tired and there's a lot of investment needed. Clearly, there's an affordability element of that. We'd love to build another 10 homes if we had the money and the opportunity, but we don't. But we do absolutely look at that. Again, it is a case by case thing. As any tenancy ends or any event happens, which means that we need to review a land holding, we ask those questions very, very carefully. That's part of the asset management group process, and there are many sites that we don't bring to market because we want to reuse them or we want to retain them for a strategic purpose. So just to try and provide some confidence that what you're seeing here, all of that has already been considered.
Thank you. One question I was going to ask, actually, if I can, in terms of resources. Obviously, we're talking about a number of sites here, quite substantial. And in terms of, does your team in asset management and does the legal services team have the resources to be able to deliver on this number of items? Because I know wearing a planning hat, legal are always under pressure. So do we have the resources to actually move these projects forward if and when they're designed to do so?
The answer is no, we don't. So this is normally we work on the basis of doing sort of £5 to £10 million worth of sales a year. We've addressed that issue by bringing in external support. So we have a contract with Alder King, and under that contract, they are acting as our sales agent for a number of sites, not for every site. It's horses for courses, but for a number of sites, and they are able to also buy in additional estate surveyor capacity to support complicated sales. We're also looking at externalising legal support for some of these sales as well, for similar reasons. The cumulative strain on the teams in legal and assets from not just this programme, but also the devolution programme and the commercial investment sales is huge at the moment. And, my team are under pressure and legal colleagues are under just as much pressure. Lots of other teams are as well. We're not unique in the council. And I think, it's a risk that we monitor very, very carefully. Councillor Lation will know we look at this at Asset Management Group. We have a monthly report on resourcing risks and we're keeping it under review. It's not looking roses at the moment, but we're busy recruiting and we have these outsourcing options available to us that help to a certain extent, but you still need someone to client and find where the deeds are and answer all the due diligence questions. So there is always an impact on the retained team.
Yeah, not a question, but just a comment in terms of experience of outsourcing of legal services in other bodies. It's not always straightforward, so do be careful on that front. Councillor Lovell.
Thank you, Chair. Just going back to the agricultural parcels section of this, plenty of discussion. Obviously, we've heard from Ollie that the state of these particular parcels would not be appropriate for inclusion in the county farm estate. But obviously, there will be the arguments that you're selling the family silver unnecessarily. What comms can we have in place to obviously explain the situation, why we're doing this, and why it couldn't be included in the county farm estate, and just to explain why that it is the sale of this particular stuff is justified.
Who wants to take that? Mr. Woodhams or cancellation?
Correct me if I'm wrong, Ollie and Charlie. I think I heard you say earlier that the pieces of farmland were where the bulk of the farmland has already gone, or there are pieces of land that are separate from the bulk of the farmland. And I think that is the main message, that this isn't complete farms being sold. So from 2018, land was retained and buildings were sold. That was the result of the task and finish group then. And there are some areas of land, some pieces of land that are now separate from any council owned buildings, and actually where other people can make more sense out of farming them than we can. Or that already have a tenant and the tenant may be interested.
Yes, exactly that. So we've got one farm where we probably wouldn't choose to sell it, but the tenant has chosen to buy it. They have a life tenancy effectively, and so it's about us reducing that maintenance and other liability. The other holdings where we are selling the bare land holdings are what we define as not core. They're not part of the core where we've got the big say around Donyet, where we've got a couple of 1,000 acres. There's our standalone site. Some of them have been where the tenants have previously bought the farmhouse and buildings, but not wished to take the land. And so this is, that's part of the, that they're non-core, non-part of our bigger holding, where we could have, as an authority, we can have more of an option to utilise a bigger land holding in a different way. So come back to the use of Donyet and its ability there for help us with looking at phosphate, and moving probably to farming or managing the whole farm state in a different way. So that might be actually in hand, so we can manage, we can get the farm payments, we can do the river management, set aside the land aside, and we can work that way. So it allows us a different opportunity.
Thank you. I've got one last councillor in the room on the general side, and then I've got 3 online, and then we'll move to the individual items. 2 councillors in the room. Councillor Osborne.
Whether I would still constitute that we have core holdings in the old sense, I don't think we have, because they've all gradually been broken up. That's not the comment I was going to make. It was really about resourcing. And Charlie was very clear when he was asked, do you have the resources? The answer was no. We also have a massive devolution programme going on to town and city councils. And you only have to look at the Exec Forward programme to see that. So when we push for resources, which is going to get the priority? The land disposals, property disposals, or the devolution? Because you can't do everything all at once. So which is going to take priority?
I think ultimately that's going to be the decision for the executive. So I don't, Councillor Lysham.
I think they're working in parallel, actually. And if they weren't, you would not have seen the Bridgewater devolution. You would not have seen the Yeovil devolution. You saw, of course, at Vesting, a lot of devolution to what is now Taunton Town Council. I completely accept the fact that there are huge pressures on one team. The asset management group now has a separate bit of the agenda where lead members for transformation, Councillor Buck-Phillip, and lead member for communities, Councillor Smith-Roberts, join the asset management group for those items. I'm not sure that we could do any more. I really don't think that we could ask officers to do better than they are delivering. I think they're doing an amazing job under massive pressure, and nobody would want to be in this position now or at any time. I go back, every time I think about this, I go back to what Councillor Bill Revans says as leader of council, and he says we need a conversation about what local authorities are for. Once we understand what a local authority is for, what is meant to do for its society, its place, its people, then we can have a sensible conversation about how we deliver those services and how we fund them. With the new government, I think that conversation is a way off, but I know that Councillor Revans has already chipped in to a meeting with the new Secretary of State, Angela Rayner MP, and I know that he will keep doing that. I know as well that devolution upwards, so devolution, how we might work with other councils in this area of the west of England, is also on his agenda, as much as is devolution of assets, services and the TUPE of staff to parish, town and city councils. It is a massive workload at the minute. Nobody can pretend otherwise, but we are committed to it, and we both thank and pay tribute to all the officers who are working so hard to achieve that aim.
That's the reason I asked over priority was it is very clear people can't work any harder than what they're doing at the moment. I'm well aware they're working hard. That is not in dispute. But what is when resources are really tight and you're up against it, ultimately, which one is going to get the priority?
I'd say again, Chair, we're working on all of them, and we are bringing in the resources where we can to help us achieve that.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, and well, one of the real advantages of bringing together 5 separate property teams is that we do have a much bigger team than any of the legacy councils had before. We are able to allocate different officers to different programs. That's happening. We're also able to sequence things. I am frustrating a lot of towns and parishes by saying we cannot have a conversation with you just yet because my team is fully occupied on devolution in one area. So we've got to sequence this to fit that resource gap, and that message is hard to hear for a lot of fantastic town councils around Somerset who are keen to get on, but where we are saying we don't have the resources to do that just yet. So that's another dimension to this that's important.
If it's a brief one, Councillor Sand, because I've got, as I say, other members who are not members of the committee but have been waiting for a long time to come in.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. It was just really to reiterate what Liz had said, really being part of a devolution deal at Yeovil Town. You know, officers have worked incredibly hard. I think one of the biggest challenges that we do face is legal resources. I think that's one of the biggest issues. Thank you.
Thank you. As I've got 4 members who are not members of the committee who've indicated. So I've got Councillor Cavill in the room, and then I've got Councillors Hunt, Woods and Chilcott. Councillor Cavill.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. A fine line between the general and the specific, because it concerns an area not too far away from here. But it is the principle that we have a strategic site that is difficult financially to deliver, and we are taking an item of that site to sell, producing a return which could have and should enable the delivery of the whole, which would be the larger gain. So if we are to do that, is there then an undertaking that within the near future such finances would be required or could have been delivered by that sale, could be put back into that site to enable its delivery? Because that is my concern, that those funds might not be available in the near future and therefore prevent the larger gain.
I think we probably might need to take that more as when we get into the detail going through the individual sites. I don't know, Mr. Woodham, whether you want to comment in general.
Yeah, I think we'd probably treat that as an individual site query, really. It's quite unique.
My apologies, Mr. Chairman, I am time short.
Understood. Councillor Hunt, are you with us? You think you may have dropped offline since your hand went up. If that's the case, Councillor Woods.
Thank you, Chairman. I was pleased, I wasn't pleased to hear the Roughmore Industrial Estate was going to be decommissioned, so to speak. And that brings me on to the red line. I had a red line drawing and I asked for it, and I'm not going to say where it is.
Okay.
Somewhere else in my division, shall we say, which gives a load of scope because I got 8 parishes. Yeah, the Roughmore estate, is that information has come out from the officer today? Has that been sent to the local council, the local parish council? Because I hadn't picked that one up.
Yes, I understand that's all gone to the local
When?
parish or town councils.
When? Sorry.
We can.
Do you know
we
when?
can advise.
If
We can
you can
advise
hold,
exactly.
yeah, if you can hold on, Councillor Woods, we're just going to look that up in the room, and then we'll give you that answer in just a couple of minutes. If I can come to Councillor Chilcott in the meantime.
Thank you, Chair. So generic questions, really. First one is around capacity. We've just heard Officer Woodham say that, you know, some town parish councils are disappointed to be told there isn't capacity. So my first question is a general one. There's a very long list here. I'm just wondering why these are taking priority over allowing some capacity for devolution, because there are some areas there that can make considerable savings. So firstly, to understand that, I'll roll them all into one for expediency. My second question is around key decisions. Will there be key decisions for each of these, or is this it? That's my second question, and I might come back on that one. And also I'm really concerned about generically about the finances, as in there's very little in here around that loss of income potentially and the impact of that on the budget, and there's very little on that in the paper. So if I could just get those answers, and there might be just a follow-up, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Lysham, do you want to?
Sales over devolution. I do believe we are working in parallel with those two pieces of work. I think it is really difficult. I think if we'd gone through LGR at a different time and we hadn't gone into a financial emergency, then devolution, it would still have been there. I recall from my 4 years at Mendip that we spent masses of time over devolution to city, town and parish councils. And I know I could see that where there was not possible to give the local council the answer it wanted at the time, it was very clear that that would very soon come back in the life of Somerset Council. I think at the moment there are real need for capital receipts from this council, and so that's why these are here now, and why they've gone through asset management group at a rate that's probably never been seen before for that kind of work. There were some other questions about the key decision. I understand that this will come to executive as a paper for one decision, and that was with Councillor Revan's guidance and knowledge that he wanted that to come to executive for decision rather than be individual key decisions or non-key decisions taken, if you like, in the back office. On the loss of income, I take your point, Councillor Chilcott, because particularly on the sale of commercial investments, that has been written in over 3 years of the MTFP, that loss of the best part of £20 million of income every year. This will have to be factored in. These sales are ahead of us at the moment, and so I would suggest that is a question for the 25-26 budget setting rather than currently, but I believe Ollie Woodhams will come in on that.
Yeah, so the recommendations in the draft executive report include a recommendation to make an appropriate financial adjustment to compensate for the income loss in the MTFP. So that is, and the details of all the income are set out in the confidential appendix, and there will need to be a revenue financial adjustment, and that's as is the case with the commercial investment disposals. That's been factored into our financial planning.
Thank you. If I could just come back, Chair, my understanding is whilst those commercial investments are included in our budgeting and financing, some of these are not. So I think that's something the committee needs to take into consideration. And the second was responding to that not taking key decisions. I find that problematic. There are 4 or 5 lines in a paper on some of these decisions. As with all things, the devil's in the detail. And Councillor Lation will recall a call-in in the last term when we were in control, and there was a 4-hour session around some lack of detail in appendices, and now we're saying we're having nothing. I don't think that's more transparent. I feel personally it's less if we have none of the detail. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Lation.
Just on that final point, there is something in the confidential paper that makes it obviously different, but as that is the confidential paper, I'll not discuss that now. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That brings us to the end of the general process that we've been talking about. I'm going to take us back then to, I think it is page 148, where the list of the non-operational assets are put in an order. Starting with 30.1, which is land at Manor Farm, Lopen. Are there any questions that anyone has on that specific site? And I'm looking online for hands as well, if there are any. I'm not seeing any. Yes, I am. Councillor Chilcott.
Yeah, it's just for clarity, really. We've obviously got an open session and a closed session. Is your intention to go through all of these one by one in open session and then all of them one by one in closed session? I was just trying to understand the approach, Chair.
I think that the suggestion would be that if there are questions that people have about a particular item that would need us to go into the confidential session, we would probably put that item to one side and then close the meeting and go back to that. Otherwise, if the first one happened to have a confidential discussion on it, we're then meaning every other application would go into confidential session potentially, other than unless we're going to be popping in and out of confidential session, which I don't think is practical. So if members are okay, I think what we will do is if there is an item that we get to on this list that someone has a question that relates to the confidential finances, then I think we would have to come back to that in the confidential session at the end. Members are okay with that? Okay. So again, if we start with 30.1, Councillor Chilcott, your hand.
Yeah, sorry to be really pedantic. So if we get to an item here where we've got a confidential question, we need to raise that with you before we go into session so you know it's coming. Is that correct?
Yes, so at that point, what I will do is make a note of that item to come back to so that we can move on to the next one and then debate that item in confidential session.
Perfect, thank you.
Okay. So on that basis, is there anything that anyone wants to raise on 30.1? Yes, Councillor Hobhouse.
Rob Reed, who is the local member, has sent myself and Bob an email asking why you're selling this piece of land and not the disused sports field in Evercreech. Now, he seems to think you own both. Do you?
Talking here, this is at the moment we're on Manor Farm, Lopen, is that right? So,
I thought you'd just gone on to Evercreech. No. Sorry.
we can now.
So we're now moving on to 30.2, which is land at Evercreech, and Councillor Hobhouse.
Not going to repeat what I've just said. I think you heard it.
I'm not going to ask you to repeat it. So we have a couple of blocks of land at Evercreech. This is one larger block of agricultural land. there is some, I don't think the sports pitch that's been referred to is this piece of land. We have the school adjacent to this land, and there is some land that the school may not choose to currently use. That school is part of any sale would allow us to retain such land to be able to enlarge the school should we need to, because it's quite a key school.
Could I ask if you actually send an email to Rob Reed, please, Councillor Rob Reed, explaining exactly what you're doing in Evercreech? Thank you.
If we haven't, we will do, yes.
So Chair, may I just make the point, as we're two councillor divisions, that it should never be one councillor and not the other.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Trimnell.
It's ever so quick, but I do know Evercreech quite well. It's very near me. Which plot of land is it that you're looking to dispose of in Evercreech?
It's the block of land immediately adjacent to the primary school.
And so you said something about it being possible for the school to expand into it,
Yes,
but they have already said they don't want to, or is it a decision that it's not? I believe they're academising, aren't they? So is that a point where, you know, it's already been decided that it's not necessary, or are you selling it to the school?
No, we would retain, because the school is still a county school as far as I'm recall. We would retain such land that would allow us to expand the school should we need to. It's quite a key location, and whilst it doesn't need to be expanded as at today or on our foreseeable future, it's quite a key town, village for the locality, and therefore we see that there's probably a need potentially one day, depending what else might come forward in the locality.
Thank you very much. Which takes us on to 30.3, which is Downs Farm. Councillor Osborne.
Thank you. Downs Farm this might have to go into confidential, I don't know. Downs is a farm on a lifetime tenancy, but I note that it is being purchased at full value. My understanding was under the old Agricultural Act, the old AHA, that lifetime tenants actually got a discount on the sale of farms. When did that policy cease? Because it used to exist. So when was the decision taken for that policy to cease? And also, how many tenants do we have left on AHA tenancies? And how many are on FBTs? Do we have any actually people on FBTs still on farms? So I have a gut feeling the answer to that is no, which was why I asked for initially at the beginning, and it seems to have got lost, was actually if we could have an update report on the county farms estate in terms of its size, types of tenancies, what's to be retained and what's to come forward for disposal. It shouldn't be that difficult to update what's already there, so as it's actually for 2024 and not 1918.
Thank you. So we can provide some updated information. I don't see there's any issue there. There are no statutory requirements for Agricultural Holdings Act to have a discount to market value. And I think, does that cover?
It covers some of it, Charlie, but when was the decision taken to change policy? Because certainly back in the day, so to speak, we were disposing of farms with discounts to AHA tenants. And it was a certain bone of contention between those of us on FBTs and those of us on AHAs, as you probably well know.
Thank you. The prelim we've been working to, you could change of policies that we seek to get, market value, and that's what we're doing.
Yeah, and I think that we're dealing with a very historic estate here. There may have been policies in years gone by. There is no extant policy on that point, and indeed our asset management strategy commits us to getting market value unless there's a particular social or economic benefit. That's a duty under law now, and I don't see any. That's what we need to adhere to what may have gone on in the past isn't really our concern now.
Yeah, just to come back to you, absolutely no problem with you not giving discounts to lifetime tenants. It ensures that everybody is treated equally.
Thank you very much. I'm not seeing anything else on that one. So 30.4 Market House Taunton. Yeah, Councillor Chilcott.
Thank you. It's confidential. Shall I just give you a list of my confidential ones to stop and help the flow of your meetings? So I've got 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 13. 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 13. It will save you me interrupting you on each one, Chair.
Okay, thanks very much. So in which case, if members are happy at this point, I think we're probably safer moving to item 9 on the list, and we'll come back to those and deal with them under confidential. Are members happy with that? Okay. So item 9 is land at Splat Spaxton. I'm not seeing any comments around the room. So we then have 10, which is Thornmarsh Castle Carey. Yeah, Councillor Hobhouse.
You obviously didn't hear Tony Juniper on the radio yesterday morning, where he is basically changing the whole of the phosphate scheme, and so you need to start looking at the biodiversity scheme if that's what you're planning to do with some of this land. A suggestion to you is the Carey-Moore Environmental Centre is just down the road, and they may be the people who you want to get them to manage this for you.
Thanks, that's a helpful suggestion. Just the decision that will be before executive is to authorise Charlie and myself, in effect, to proceed with the disposal of this land. As we do that, we will of course be keeping the 5 acres we're talking about here under review, and it does say in the report, the proposal is to retain that land if appropriate. So we do need to look at the latest position, and of course we will, if we do retain it, we would really welcome any local input into how that land is best managed. So thanks for the tip there.
Secondly, can I apologise? You did send me an email. It went straight in my junk because you had headed it something governance with no reference to Somerset or anything else. I found it now in the junk.
Okay, thank you. And also, while we're talking about emails, I've been advised for Councillor Woods online, the 18th of July was the date that the email was sent to the appropriate parish council on the item that you queried. Not seeing anything else on 310, so...
Can I make a comment about that?
Yes, please do, Councillor Woods.
Yeah, they haven't had a committee meeting since that I would have been at, so I would not have heard about the Roughmore estate. If I had, I wouldn't have had to write an email in great detail about the land that is to be sold or whatever. I will bring that up under the confidential item. I don't know what number it is because I haven't got the agenda in full. And that's not my problem.
Could you just confirm for me which the description of the land that we're talking about for you that you wish to raise? It's
land. Well, I thought we weren't going to discuss where it is because it's
we're not,
confidential.
No, I understand that, Councillor Woods. All I want to know is so I can try and identify which item it is on the agenda. If you tell me where it is, then I can...
It's in Willerton.
Okay. Item 6. Oh, terrific. That's already been highlighted by Councillor Chilcott, so we'll be coming back to that one anyway, Councillor Woods. Okay. 3011, land at Forton and Chard. Any issues with that one for anyone around the room or online? I'm not seeing any. Okay, so we have 12, which is Lees Farm, Limpsham. Not seeing anything. So 13 has already been mentioned by Councillor Chilcott, so we'll be coming to that in confidential. 14, C Block, County Hall. Again, I'm not seeing any comments. So 15, Firepool. Councillor Coles.
Yes, so in confidential session, I think. Thank you.
Which takes us to 16 Five Ways Resource Centre. Not seeing any comments. 17 is North Street, Wellington. Oh, okay. 18 is the Mill at Chard. Councillor Osborne, is that one that you want to go into the financial details or just a general comment?
It's more a general comment because there was a live planning application on that. I think that was put in as part of the regen. But then there were objections from English Heritage. So there was a battle royal over something called Building 11, which no one thought was particularly attractive, but English Heritage, I think, chose to disagree. At that point, we became unitary. So I just like sort of an update on what is the position with the planning application with that. Is it still live? Has it been withdrawn? Or is it something that a new purchaser would have to take on and deal with?
So I think my understanding is that planning application got withdrawn and just as it held by, but yes, it'd be something we'd look at as a total new scheme there to deliver. Yeah.
Thank you. So next one is 19, the Bowden Centre in Chard as well. Not seeing any comments either in the room or online. So we then have 20, which is Land Ash Martock. Councillor Osborne.
Yeah, I seem to remember, I don't know whether this is going to be the same plot of land or not, and some of my fellow South Somerset councillors may remember, but there was an ambition, and we actually did see very outlined plans. May well have to go into confidential because I could well be naming names. I'll put that into confidential.
So if we pause that one and come back to it, 21, which is South Street, Williscombe. Not seeing anyone. 22, Mary Street Car Park, Taunton. Councillor Chilcott.
Thank you, Chair. If I could add that one, can I also add a generic comment just before we head into confidential? Do you want me to do that now or when you've finished that list? I don't want you to hop straight into confidential without having the opportunity.
Yeah, no, happy. Go ahead, please.
Thank you. There's a concern for me, and certainly that lack of a key decision I wasn't aware of. And my concern is we don't have many councillors attending this meeting, and all the other councillors involved in these might not be aware of today might be their only opportunity. The other thing I would say that, there is devil in the detail, and certainly we've talked about red lines and areas today. None of that we will be able to cover because that's sort of further detail in today's meeting. So that will be lost. And I think moreover, it's that lack of local knowledge. And I think we've heard a couple of instances today where local councillors have specific input that might help and support the council. And my concern again is if you are not going to take them through the key decision, when will those conversations and how will they be had? And for me, again, that's another concern with this process moving forwards. Thank you.
Thank you. And I'm possibly going to ask Mr. Woodham just for a clarification in the sense of obviously what's coming before us today will be going subsequently to the executive. So there will be a report there at which members will have the ability to attend that meeting and address if they wish to.
Absolutely. So this is in effect a key decision report. It covers a number of assets simultaneously. We do that. We've done that before. That is something that we do. And but in this occasion, it was a decision to really give this the airing cumulatively because it's part of a wider strategy that the executive felt was appropriate. But just to assure you, Councillor Chilcott, we are in discussions with local members and towns and parish councils. We are providing plans on request to any of those local stakeholders. We are informing all of those local stakeholders of the process for making representations to the executive meeting, as we would, as is the case with any key decision. So the decision-making process is in effect the same. It's just that we're doing this with a number of assets at one time rather than individually through 22 separate key decisions. But I don't believe there's anything that we're not doing in terms of transparency or the ability to make representations and ask questions before the decision maker, in this case, the whole of executive rather than an individual member, takes the decision.
Thank you. Can I just respond to that? The reality is that local members often won't know they've got a question until they've seen the detail of the decision, and that's the bit that I think will be missing. Thank you.
I think certainly post this committee, it would be useful maybe to reiterate and go back to the ward members who've been notified to re-notify them, just to make sure that they've had it and it hasn't got put in people's spam folders by mistake.
I think what we'll do is Wendy and Charlie and myself, we are certainly in active dialogue with a number of local ones, but we'll just make sure we think everyone has got the message, noting Councillor Hophouse's point, and has an adequate opportunity to ask us for the detail and make their points at executive.
Thank you. Members, if you're happy at that point, we will look to move into the confidential session to look at those items that have been highlighted that need to talk on that side. So that means that I need to propose that we pass a resolution that we would need, we need to have a resolution passed, proposed and seconded and duly passed under Schedule 12A of the Local Government Act 1972 to exclude the press and public from the meeting on the basis that if they were present during the business to be transacted, there would be likelihood of disclosure of exempt information within the meaning of the Schedule 12A to the Local Government Act 1972. So is there a proposal for that, please? Councillor Sowton, seconded Councillor Osborne. All those in favour that we pass into that motion, please show. And any against? That's clearly carried. So if we can ask the officers present to ensure that we are with any members of press and public who are online with us at the moment,